Hello, and thank you for choosing this clean historical Western romance by Emma Ashwood. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep sharing more wonderful stories for free. So grab a cozy spot, kick back, and let this story whisk you away to a different time and place. Enjoy. Copyright Emma Ashwood. The Plains Called Her Name by Emma Ashwood. Chapter 1. The bell above the door chimed as Prudence Everett stepped into the print shop. The familiar smell of ink and paper greeted her like an old friend. She set her basket on the counter and untied her bonnet, tucking a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. "Father, I'm here," she called toward the back room where the press stood silent. Timothy Everett emerged, spectacles perched on his nose, ink staining his fingers as always. "Prudence, good. I need your help with the Landys order. The invoice needs checking before delivery." She moved behind the counter and pulled the ledger toward her. Her eyes scanned the columns of figures, while her father watched with quiet approval. This was their routine. Most mornings she spent helping with the accounts and correspondence, while other young ladies her age paid social calls or practiced needlework. "The total should be $3.40, she said after a moment. "You've marked it at $3.20. "Sharp as ever." He adjusted the figure. "What would I do without you?" Prudence smiled but didn't answer. Soon enough, he would have to manage without her help. In 3 months, she would be Mrs. Charlton Radcliffe, and a lawyer's wife had different duties than a printer's daughter. The thought sat heavy in her chest. She pulled out her own small notebook where she kept a list of tasks related to the wedding. The invitations needed to be finalized. The dress required a final fitting. Mother wanted her opinion on the flower arrangements, though Prudence suspected her opinion mattered very little when Letitia Everett had already made her decision. "How are the preparations coming along?" her father asked gently. "Well enough. Mother has most matters in hand." He studied her face for a moment, then returned to sorting type. Prudence appreciated that he didn't press further. Her father had a way of seeing more than others without saying much about it. The morning passed in comfortable work. Prudence reviewed invoices, drafted letters to suppliers, and helped package an order of business cards for the bank. Her hands moved with practiced ease, her mind only half occupied with the tasks. The other half kept turning toward Charlton. She tried to picture their life together, a home of their own, quiet evenings, perhaps children someday. The images came slowly, as though viewed through cloudy glass. Whenever she attempted to see the details clearly, they slipped away. At 11:30, the bell chimed again. Charlton Radcliffe stepped through the door, tall and well-dressed in a charcoal suit. His dark hair was neatly combed, his posture confident. He looked every inch the successful lawyer he was becoming. "Prudence." He crossed to her and took her hand briefly. The gesture felt proper rather than affectionate. "Mr. Everett, Charlton." Her father nodded. "I apologize for the short visit," Charlton said, already glancing toward the door. "I have a meeting at 1 o'clock that I cannot miss. Senator Grayton will be in attendance." Prudence felt the familiar flutter of something she couldn't quite name. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "Of course," she said. "You mentioned the meeting in your note yesterday." "Did I?" He looked distracted. "I've had so many appointments lately. The firm is considering me for a position on a rather important case. Political connections, you understand. It could mean significant advancement." "That sounds promising." "It is." He smiled, but his attention drifted past her shoulder to the clock on the wall. "The senator has been quite impressed with my work. He mentioned me specifically at a dinner last week. Opportunities are coming, Prudence. Real opportunities." She waited for him to say more about their future together, about the home they would share or the life they would build. Instead, he spoke of committee meetings and strategic alliances and men of influence who might prove useful to know. "The Grayton Circle includes some of the most powerful men in the state," he continued. "If I can secure their backing, there's no limit to what I might achieve. A partnership in the firm within 5 years, perhaps a position in government eventually." "Those are ambitious goals," Prudence said carefully. "Ambition is necessary." His tone carried a hint of defensiveness. "A man must position himself well in this world, especially a man of modest beginnings like myself." Prudence understood what he meant. Charlton's father had been a clerk, his family respectable but far from wealthy. He carried that knowledge like a weight, constantly working to distance himself from his origins. "I understand," she said. "I knew you would." He squeezed her hand. "You're sensible about such matters. It's one of the qualities I most admire in you." Sensible. The word echoed in her mind. It was how he always described her. Sensible and steady, never beautiful or cherished, never beloved. "I should let you return to your work," Prudence said. "You mentioned your meeting." "Yes, quite right." He checked his pocket watch. "I'll call on you again soon. Perhaps Sunday after church?" Sunday would be fine. He nodded to her father, touched the brim of his hat, and left as quickly as he'd arrived. The bell chimed his departure. Prudence stood at the counter, her hands resting on the ledger. She could feel her father's gaze, but didn't meet it. "He's very focused on his career," Timothy said quietly. "He works hard. It's admirable." "It is." Her father paused. "But a marriage requires more than ambition, Prue." She looked up at him then, appreciating the use of her preferred pet name. "I know what marriage requires." "Do you?" His voice was gentle, not accusing, "because watching you just now, I'm not certain you do." Prudence wanted to protest, to defend her choice, to explain that Charlton was a good match and that her feelings would grow deeper with time. That was how these arrangements worked, wasn't it? Respect came first, then comfort, and eventually affection would follow. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "I should finish the Landy invoice. They'll want it delivered this afternoon." Her father watched her for a moment longer, then nodded and returned to his work. Prudence bent over the ledger, her eyes tracing the neat columns of numbers. Everything balanced perfectly on paper, each figure in its proper place, each account settled and correct. She told herself that life could be like that too. Order and reason would prevail. Charlton was building something important, and she would be part of that. A lawyer needed a wife who could manage a household, who could stand beside him at political gatherings, who wouldn't embarrass him with silly romantic notions. She could be that wife. She would be that wife. The doubt that whispered in her chest was simply nervousness, she decided. All brides felt uncertain before their wedding day. Once they were married, once they had built a life together, the hollow feeling would fade. Affection would grow in the space where doubt now lived. It had to. Prudence closed the ledger with more force than necessary and reached for the next task. Work had always been her comfort, and today was no exception. She would focus on what she could control: the accounts that needed balancing, the letters that needed writing, the practical matters that filled her days. The wedding was 3 months away. That left plenty of time for her heart to catch up with her head. Chapter 2. Prudence adjusted the pins in her hair one final time, studying her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The pale green dress her mother had insisted she wear made her skin look sallow, but Letitia had been firm. "Mrs. Grayton favors softer colors," she'd said. "You must make the right impression." The right impression. Always the right impression. Charlton would collect her within the hour for the political gathering at the Grayton estate. She'd been to such events before, but this one felt different. Senator Grayton himself would be in attendance, along with several other men whose names her mother spoke with particular reverence. "Prudence," Letitia called from downstairs. "Your gloves are still on the dining table." Prudence descended the stairs to find her mother waiting in the hall, already dressed in her finest burgundy silk. Timothy stood near the door, looking uncomfortable in his formal coat. "You look lovely, dear," he said quietly. "Thank you, Father." Letitia circled Prudence, examining every detail. She reached up to adjust a curl that had fallen across Prudence's forehead. "There, much better. Now remember, when Mrs. Grayton speaks to you, ask about her garden. She's quite proud of it." "Yes, Mother. And if Senator Grayton addresses you directly, be gracious but brief. Men of his stature don't wish to spend their evenings in lengthy conversation with young ladies." Prudence nodded. She'd heard these instructions countless times before. The carriage arrived precisely on schedule. Charlton stepped down, looking polished in a dark suit with a silver watch chain visible across his vest. He greeted her parents cordially before offering Prudence his arm. "You look well," he said as they settled into the carriage. "Thank you, as do you." He was already distracted, checking his pocket watch and glancing at papers he'd brought along. I've prepared some talking points in case the senator asks about the railroad expansion bill. The firm has taken a position on it, and I want to be certain I represent our views accurately. Prudence watched the houses pass by the window. Will there be much discussion of politics this evening? Of course, that's the purpose of the gathering. He looked up from his papers, seeming surprised by her question. These events are crucial for making connections, Prudence. Every conversation matters. I see. Senator Grayton has the ear of some of the most powerful men in the state. If I can demonstrate my understanding of key issues, it could open doors. He returned to his notes. I must be prepared. They rode the rest of the way in silence, Charlton absorbed in his papers while Prudence watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grayton Estate was impressive, with manicured lawns and a grand entrance lit by gas lamps. Carriages lined the drive, and well-dressed guests climbed the steps to the front door where Mrs. Grayton stood receiving visitors. Charlton straightened his jacket and offered Prudence his arm again. Remember, this is important. They entered the residence together, and Prudence immediately noted the level of noise and activity present. The reception hall was filled with people, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. Men in dark suits clustered in groups, talking intently. Women in elaborate gowns stood in smaller circles, their fans moving in coordinated rhythms. Mrs. Grayton greeted them with practiced warmth. Mr. Radcliffe, how delightful, and this must be your intended. Miss Prudence Everett, Charlton said. Prudence, Mrs. Grayton. Charmed. Mrs. Grayton's eyes swept over Prudence briefly before returning to Charlton. The senator is in the study, with several gentlemen discussing the railroad matter. I'm certain he'd welcome your perspective. Charlton's face lit up. I'd be honored. Miss Everett, you'll find refreshments in the dining room, Mrs. Grayton added. The other young ladies are gathered there. Prudence found herself guided toward a room filled with women while Charlton disappeared into the study without a backward glance. She accepted a glass of punch from a servant and stood near the wall, observing. The women spoke in clusters, their conversations filled with names Prudence recognized from newspaper announcements and her mother's gossip. They discussed upcoming weddings, recent appointments to important positions, and which families were rising in social standing. That's Prudence Everett, she heard one woman whisper to another. Engaged to Charlton Radcliffe, the lawyer. The ambitious one? I've heard he's quite determined to advance. Aren't they all? The first woman laughed softly. At least Miss Everett seems sensible enough not to expect romance. Prudence felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her expression neutral and moved toward the refreshment table. An hour passed. Prudence made polite conversation with several women, asked Mrs. Grayton about her garden, as instructed, and smiled until her face ached. Through it all, she kept catching glimpses of Charlton through the open study door. He stood among the men, nodding earnestly, speaking when addressed, his entire body angled toward Senator Grayton. Finally, the men emerged from the study. Charlton's eyes were bright with excitement as he made his way toward her. Prudence, there you are. He took her elbow and steered her toward a group of older gentlemen. Senator, may I introduce my fiancée, Miss Prudence Everett. Senator Grayton was a large man with silver hair and a commanding presence. He nodded politely. A pleasure, Miss Everett. Senator, Prudence kept her voice quiet and respectful, as her mother had instructed. Your intended speaks quite favorably of you, the senator said. He tells me you're steady and sensible, admirable qualities in a wife. There it was again, steady and sensible. Thank you, sir, Prudence managed. Charlton beamed as though the senator had bestowed a great compliment. The men chuckled, and Prudence felt something cold settle in her chest. She smiled as expected, said nothing, and watched Charlton's face glow with satisfaction. When the men returned to their conversation, Prudence found herself standing slightly apart, holding her punch glass and feeling utterly invisible. Charlton was completely absorbed in the discussion, his eyes never leaving the senator's face. He leaned forward when Grayton spoke, nodded at all the right moments, and carefully inserted comments that showed his knowledge without seeming presumptuous. She'd seen him work before, but never with this intensity. It was as though every word, every gesture was calculated to achieve maximum effect. He was performing, and he was very good at it. An older woman approached Prudence. "Your young man is quite focused, isn't he? He takes his career seriously, as he should, though I hope he takes his marriage equally seriously when the time comes." The woman studied Prudence with sharp eyes. These ambitious men sometimes forget that a wife needs more than financial security. Prudence didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. The evening wore on. More conversations, more introductions, more careful positioning near important people. Charlton moved through the room with purpose, always aware of who was present and who might prove useful. When he finally returned to Prudence's side near midnight, he was practically vibrating with energy. "Did you see how long Senator Grayton spoke with me?" he said as they waited for their carriage. "He even mentioned me by name when discussing the railroad bill. This is exactly what I needed. I'm glad the evening was successful for you." "It was. This could change everything, Prudence. If Grayton remembers me, if he mentions me to the right people." He trailed off, already thinking ahead to the next opportunity, the next connection. In the carriage, he continued talking about the evening's conversations, the impressions he'd made, the possibilities that might unfold. Prudence listened, or pretended to, while watching the dark streets pass by the window. "You were very quiet tonight," Charlton said eventually. "But that's appropriate. Mrs. Grayton commented that you seemed properly reserved." "Did she?" "Yes, she said you conducted yourself well." He patted her hand absently. "That's important. The wives of successful men must know how to behave in these settings. No drawing attention, no inappropriate opinions, just quiet dignity." "I see." "You do see, don't you?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time all evening. "This is how we build a life, Prudence. Through connections, through reputation, through careful advancement. It's not romantic, perhaps, but it's practical, and you're a practical woman." There it was again. Practical, sensible, steady, never cherished, never loved. The carriage stopped outside her home. Charlton helped her down and walked her to the door. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said formally. "You represented yourself well. Good night, Charlton." He touched his hat and returned to the carriage. Prudence stood on the step, watching him leave. Inside, she could hear her mother waiting, no doubt eager to hear every detail of the evening. But Prudence remained outside a moment longer, breathing in the cool night air and wondering why success felt so much like loneliness. Chapter 3. The morning after the Grayton gathering, Prudence woke to the sound of voices drifting up from the parlor. She recognized her mother's tone immediately, bright and animated in a way it rarely was during ordinary household conversation. Guests. Her mother was entertaining. Prudence dressed quickly and pinned her hair back, studying her reflection briefly. The pale green dress from the night before hung on the back of her door, and she found herself turning away from it. Downstairs, she could hear Letitia's voice more clearly now, carrying through the open parlor door. Of course, Senator Grayton was himself in attendance. He and Charlton spoke at great length about the railroad bill. The senator even mentioned Charlton by name when addressing the other gentleman. "How wonderful!" Mrs. Pedersen's voice rose in response. "Your daughter must be so pleased to be marrying a man with such connections." Prudence paused at the bottom of the stairs, her hand resting on the banister. "Prudence understands the value of a proper match," Letitia continued. "She's always been a sensible girl. No foolish romantic notions to cloud her judgment. Charlton will make an excellent husband, and more importantly, his career prospects are exceptional." "You must be very proud," another voice added. Prudence thought it might be Mrs. Whiteley from the church committee. "I am. This engagement has exceeded all my hopes. When Charlton first began calling on Prudence, I could see immediately that he was a young man destined for greatness. His connections alone are worth their weight in gold. Do you know he's been personally invited to 3 political dinners this month? 3. Prudence felt that same cold sensation settle in her stomach. She should go in, greet her mother's friends, and accept their congratulations with appropriate grace. Instead, she found herself moving quietly past the parlor door toward the back of the house. "Of course, the wedding will have to reflect Charlton's position," Letitia was saying. "Nothing too grand, mind you. We're not ostentatious people, but certainly a gathering befitting a lawyer with political aspirations. I'm thinking perhaps the rose garden at the Landys' estate. Mrs. Landy has already indicated she'd be delighted to host. Mrs. Pedersen made an approving sound. Very suitable. And Prudence's dress? Being made by Mrs. Chipper, naturally. She does all the best work. White satin with Belgian lace. Simple, but elegant. Prudence will look exactly as a lawyer's bride should look. Exactly as she should look. Not how she wanted to look, not how she felt. Prudence slipped through the kitchen and out the back door. The print shop stood separate from the house, a modest building that smelled permanently of ink and paper. She could see her father through the window, bent over his work. The bell above the door announced her entrance. Timothy looked up and smiled. "Good morning. I didn't expect to see you this early. Mother has guests." Understanding crossed his face. "I see. Well, I'm glad for the company. I'm working on the church bulletins. Could use another set of eyes on the proofs." Prudence moved to his side gratefully, accepting the papers he handed her. For several minutes, they worked in comfortable silence, the familiar rhythm of the print shop wrapping around her like a blanket. "The gathering went well last night?" her father asked eventually. "Mother seems pleased with it." "And you?" Prudence kept her eyes on the bulletin board, though the words had started to blur. "Charlton was very successful. He made exactly the impression he hoped to make." "That's not what I asked." She set down the papers carefully, smoothing them flat with her fingertips. "I don't know what to say, Father." The truth would be a good start. Prudence looked up at him then. His steady gaze held no judgment, only concern. It made something crack inside her chest. "I feel like a piece of furniture being positioned in the right room," she said quietly. "Charlton speaks of our marriage as though it's a strategic move in his career. Mother speaks of it as a triumph of social advancement. No one speaks of it as a union between two people who care for each other." Timothy removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly with his handkerchief. "Have you told Charlton how you feel?" "What would I say? That I wish he cared for me as much as he cares for Senator Grayton's approval? That I'm tired of being described as steady and sensible? That I wonder if he even knows the color of my eyes?" "Those would all be reasonable concerns to raise with the man you're planning to marry." Prudence shook her head. "It would sound foolish and romantic, exactly the sort of impractical thinking that everyone praises me for avoiding." "There's nothing impractical about wanting to be valued for who you are rather than what you represent. But isn't that what marriage is? A practical arrangement? Love comes later, if it comes at all. That's what Mother has always said." Timothy put his spectacles back on and looked at his daughter with great care. "Your mother and I have had a good marriage. I respect her, and I believe she respects me. But, Prue, I've always wondered if we settled for contentment when we might have had more. I don't want that for you. Charlton is a good match. Everyone says so." "Everyone says so," her father repeated. "But what does your heart say?" Prudence felt tears prick behind her eyes. "My heart doesn't know what to say. I've spent so long trying to be sensible and practical that I'm not sure I know how to listen to it anymore." "Then perhaps it's time to learn." They stood in silence for a moment, the press quiet between them. "Mother would be devastated if I called off the engagement," Prudence said finally. "She's already told half the town about Charlton's connections to Senator Grayton. Your mother's disappointment is not a reason to marry." "But, Father, what if I'm wrong? What if this doubt is just nervousness? What if I'm throwing away a perfectly good future because I'm chasing some romantic notion that doesn't exist?" Timothy reached out and took her hand, his fingers stained with ink as always. "Prue, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. You deserve to be cherished. You deserve to be more than someone's sensible choice. And if this man makes you feel small or invisible, then no amount of political connections can make that right. What should I do?" "Trust your heart. Even if it's been quiet for a while, it still knows the truth. You just have to be brave enough to listen." Prudence nodded, though she wasn't sure she felt brave at all. Through the window, she could see the house. Her mother's guests were probably still in the parlor, drinking tea and discussing the brilliant match Letitia Everett had secured for her daughter. A triumph. Her mother had called it. But Prudence couldn't shake the feeling that triumphs weren't supposed to feel this lonely. Chapter 4. 3 days after her conversation with her father, Prudence sat in the parlor working on embroidery she had no interest in completing. Her mother had insisted she finish the pillowcases before the wedding, saying they would be a proper addition to her trousseau. Prudence stabbed the needle through the linen with more force than necessary. Charlton had sent a note that morning, canceling their planned walk. A business matter had arisen, he wrote. He would call on her when his schedule permitted, as though she were an appointment to be fit between more important obligations. The front door opened and closed. Prudence heard her mother's voice in the hall, bright with excitement. "Prudence, Charlton is here." She set down her embroidery and stood, smoothing her skirts. When she entered the hall, Charlton was removing his hat. He looked tired, she thought. There were shadows under his eyes she hadn't noticed before. "Prudence." He took her hand briefly. "Might we speak privately?" "Of course. The parlor is available." Her mother beamed. "I'll have tea brought in." "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Everett," Charlton said quickly. "This won't take long." The tone in his voice made Prudence's stomach tighten. She led him into the parlor and closed the door. Charlton stood near the window, not sitting. He held his hat in both hands, turning it slowly. "I wanted to explain about the note this morning. The cancellation. You had business to attend to, I understand." "Yes, but it was important business, very important." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been presented with an opportunity, Prudence, one that could change the future for us." "What sort of opportunity?" "I was invited to meet with Mr. Harrison Whiteley and his associate, Mr. Charles Pemberton. They're senior partners in a Boston law firm with extensive political connections. Very extensive. The firm represents some of the wealthiest families in New England." Prudence sat down slowly. "I see. They've been watching my work. Apparently, Senator Grayton mentioned me specifically in correspondence with Mr. Whiteley. They believe I have a future in politics, Prudence. A real future, but it would require relocating to Boston." "Boston," she repeated quietly. Charlton began to pace, his energy returning as he spoke. "The opportunities there are beyond anything available here. The firm handles cases that shape policy at the highest levels. I'd be working with men who advise governors, senators, even the president. The connections alone would be invaluable." "That sounds very promising." "It is, but there's more." He stopped pacing and faced her directly. "The Whiteley family has a daughter, Margaret. She's 20, well-educated, and accomplished. Mr. Whiteley mentioned that she would be an asset to any young lawyer with political ambitions. She understands that world, you see. She was raised in it." Prudence felt the cold stab spread through her chest. "I'm certain she's very suitable." "The thing is, Prudence, this isn't just about a position at the firm. It's about becoming part of a network. The Whiteley family can open doors I never dreamed of opening. With their backing, I could achieve that which would take decades otherwise, or might never happen at all. And Miss Whitley is part of that backing." Charlton had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mr. Whiteley made it clear that marriage into his family would secure my position at the firm. He spoke of financial support, introductions to influential families, a partnership track that would be significantly accelerated." Prudence stood and walked to the other window, putting distance between them. Outside, she could see her father crossing from the print shop to the house. "What are you saying, Charlton?" "I'm saying this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the kind of opportunity a man from my background doesn't refuse." "And our engagement?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I've been thinking about what's best for both of us. You're a good woman, Prudence, sensible and capable. You deserve a husband who can appreciate those qualities fully. But you can't appreciate them when there's a wealthier option available. That's not fair. This isn't about wealth alone. It's about position, influence, the ability to make a real difference in the world. You must understand that." Prudence turned to face him. "What I understand is that you're telling me I'm not good enough for your ambitions." "No, that's not what I'm saying at all. You're perfectly suitable for the life we planned. But the life we planned has changed. The opportunities before me now require a different sort of wife. someone who understands that world naturally, who comes from it, someone whose father can offer you financial backing and political access. Charlton's jaw tightened. You make it sound calculating, isn't it? It's practical. Surely you, of all people, can appreciate practicality. Marriage is a partnership, Prudence. The most successful partnerships are built on mutual advantage. The Whiteley connection offers advantages we simply couldn't achieve together. Prudence felt strangely calm, as though she were watching this conversation happen to someone else. When did you decide this? I haven't decided anything yet. I'm simply considering my options. I wanted to be honest with you about where matters stand. How generous. There's no need for sarcasm. I'm trying to handle this appropriately. I wanted you to know what I was thinking before any final decisions were made. Before you formally broke our engagement, you mean? Charlton set his hat on the side table and ran a hand through his hair. I'm not saying our engagement must end. I'm saying circumstances have changed and we need to consider what's best for everyone involved. What's best for you, you mean? For both of us. Can you honestly say you'd be happy in Boston? Moving away from your family? Navigating a world you don't understand? You're comfortable here, Prudence. You have your work at the print shop, your routines. Why would you want to give that up for a life that would make you miserable? You're very thoughtful, considering my happiness. I am considering it. I don't want to make you unhappy. But I also can't turn down an opportunity like this. You must see that. Prudence walked to the door and placed her hand on the handle. I see perfectly clearly, Charlton. You've been offered something better, and you're trying to convince both of us that ending our engagement is actually kindness on your part. Prudence, please, try to understand. I do understand. You've made yourself very clear. Was there anything else you needed to discuss? He picked up his hat, his expression a mixture of relief and frustration. I'll need time to make my final decision. Mr. Whiteley expects an answer within the week. How difficult for you having to choose between opportunities. There's no need to be bitter. I'm not bitter, Charlton. I'm simply done with this conversation. She opened the door. Good day. He hesitated, perhaps expecting her to argue or plead. When she simply stood holding the door open, he walked through it. I'll call on you again soon, once I've had time to think everything through properly. If you wish. Prudence closed the door behind him and stood in the empty parlor. She heard him speak briefly with her mother in the hall, heard the front door open and close. The embroidery lay on the chair where she'd left it, the needle stuck halfway through a rose she'd been stitching. A proper addition to her trousseau, her mother had said. Prudence picked up the pillowcase, pulled the needle free, and set the whole piece aside. She didn't think she'd be needing a trousseau after all. Chapter 5. 4 days passed before Charlton returned. 4 days during which Prudence helped her father at the print shop, spoke little at dinner, and avoided her mother's anxious questions about when the wedding dress fitting would be scheduled. She knew what was coming. She'd known it from the moment Charlton had mentioned Margaret Whiteley's name. When he finally arrived, it was late afternoon. Prudence was alone in the parlor, having sent her mother on an errand to the dressmaker. She heard the knock at the door, heard their housekeeper answer it, heard Charlton's voice asking if Miss Everett was at home. She stood and smoothed her skirts, watching through the window as a carriage passed by on the street. Charlton entered the room with his hat in his hands. His expression was composed, almost businesslike. There was no hesitation in his step, no uncertainty in his bearing. Prudence, thank you for seeing me. Please sit down. He remained standing. I won't take much of your time. I've come to speak with you about a matter that requires clarity. Prudence felt strangely calm. I believe I know what you've come to say. Then you'll understand that this is not a decision I've made lightly. I've given the matter considerable thought over these past few days. I'm certain you have. He cleared his throat and continued in the same measured tone he might use when discussing a legal contract. I've accepted the position with the Whiteley firm in Boston. It's an extraordinary opportunity, one that will set the course for my entire career. Mr. Whiteley has been exceptionally generous in outlining what my future with the firm might look like. How fortunate for you. Prudence, You must understand that this isn't about you personally. You're an admirable woman. Any man would be fortunate to have you as a wife. But the circumstances have changed. My circumstances have changed. The life I'm moving toward requires a different sort of partnership than what we planned together. She watched him speak, noting how carefully he chose each word, how precisely he delivered each phrase. This was a speech he'd rehearsed, perhaps even written down and practiced in front of a mirror. "When did you decide?" She asked quietly. "I told you I've been thinking about it for several days." "No. When did you actually decide? Not when did you rehearse this conversation? When did you know you were going to break our engagement?" Charlton's composure flickered for just a moment. "I don't think the exact timing matters. It matters to me." He was silent for a moment, then said, "The morning after I met with Mr. Whiteley. I knew then that I couldn't turn down the opportunity. Everything else followed from that decision." The morning after. Before he'd even come to tell her about the Boston offer. Before he'd pretended there was still a choice to be made. "I see." "Prudence, I want you to know that I hold you in the highest regard. This isn't a reflection on your character or your suitability as a wife. It's simply that our paths are diverging. What I need now is different from what I needed when we became engaged. What you need is Miss Whiteley's father's money and connections." His jaw tightened. "That's an oversimplification." "Is it? You're ending our engagement to marry a woman whose family can advance your career. That seems fairly simple to me. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." Prudence walked to the window and looked out at the street. A woman passed by with two children, their voices carrying faintly through the glass. Normal life, continuing as it always had. "Have you already proposed to her?" she asked without turning around. "I haven't formally proposed, no, but Mr. Whiteley has made his expectations clear and I've indicated my willingness to meet them." "How efficient." "Prudence, I came here to end our engagement honorably, to explain my reasons and to part on good terms. I had hoped you would understand." She turned to face him. "Understand what exactly? That I was adequate until something better came along? That being steady and sensible isn't quite enough when there's a wealthier alternative? Oh, I understand perfectly, Charlton. There's no need for bitterness." "I'm not bitter. I'm simply stating facts. You're choosing advancement over our engagement. You made that choice days ago. You've come here now to make it official, to deliver your prepared speech, and to leave with your conscience clear. Am I wrong about any of that?" He said nothing. Prudence walked to where he stood and looked directly at him. "You don't need to explain further. Consider our engagement ended. I release you from any obligation to me. You're free to pursue Miss Whiteley and the glorious future that awaits you in Boston. I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you." "What you intended doesn't matter very much now, does it?" Charlton put on his hat and adjusted it carefully. "I'll send word to the appropriate people about the change in our plans. I'll make it clear that the decision was mutual and amicable." "How thoughtful." "Prudence, I genuinely wish you well. I hope you find happiness." "Goodbye, Charlton." He nodded once and left the room. She heard him speak briefly with the housekeeper in the hall, heard the front door open and close, and heard his footsteps descending the front steps. Prudence stood in the empty parlor for a long moment. Then she sat down in the nearest chair and waited. It didn't take long. Within an hour, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Pedersen and her daughter had come to call. They expressed surprise at finding Prudence at home, said they'd just been passing by, and wondered if perhaps Prudence had heard any news from Mr. Radcliffe lately. Prudence received them politely, offered tea, and deflected their questions with practiced ease. They left after 20 minutes, their curiosity clearly unsatisfied. By evening, her mother had returned from her errands full of disturbing news. Mrs. Landy had mentioned hearing something about Charlton Radcliffe and a position in Boston. Mrs. Chipper at the dress shop had asked whether Prudence's wedding dress should still be made to the original specifications. Someone at the market had congratulated Letitia on her daughter's engagement to such an ambitious young man, then asked in the next breath whether it was true he was leaving town. "What is going on?" Letitia demanded, standing in the parlor doorway with her parcels still in her arms. "Why are people asking me about Charlton leaving? Why would Mrs. Chipper question the wedding dress? Prudence set down her sewing. Charlton came to call this afternoon. And? The engagement is ended. Letitia dropped her parcels. What? He's accepted a position in Boston. He came to inform me that our engagement is over. But he can't simply end it. There must be some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Mother. He was quite clear. He's moving to Boston, and he no longer wishes to marry me. Her mother's face went white, then red. This is impossible. How could he do this? After everything we've done, all the preparations, what people will say. Timothy appeared in the doorway behind his wife. Letitia, perhaps we should discuss this calmly. Calmly? Our daughter has been humiliated, cast aside like an old coat. How am I supposed to hold my head up in this town? What will people think? I imagine they'll think exactly what they're already thinking, Prudence said quietly. That Charlton Radcliffe found a better offer and took it. Letitia sank onto the sofa, her hand pressed to her chest. This is a disaster. An absolute disaster. Timothy moved to Prudence's side and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Are you all right? I'm fine, Father. You don't seem fine. You seem very calm. Would you prefer if I wept? I'd prefer if you felt whatever you actually feel rather than what you think you should feel. Prudence looked up at him. Honestly, I feel relieved. Is that terrible? Not at all. Letitia looked up sharply. Relieved? How can you possibly be relieved? You've been jilted. Prudence. Abandoned. This is a scandal. It's done, Mother. No amount of distress will change it. But what will people say? They'll say whatever they choose to say. We can't control that. Her mother stood abruptly and began pacing. I need to think. There must be something we can do. Perhaps if we spoke to Charlton, we could explain that this will damage both your reputations. Perhaps he hasn't thought it through properly. He's thought it through very carefully, I assure you. Then we'll speak to Senator Grayton. He introduced Charlton to those Boston people, didn't he? Perhaps he can intervene. Mother, stop. It's over. Charlton has made his choice. Well, you can't just accept it. You have to fight for your engagement. Prudence set down her sewing with deliberate care. Why would I fight for a man who doesn't want to marry me? Why would I beg someone to honor a commitment he clearly regrets making? Because the alternative is humiliation. The humiliation has already happened. Fighting to keep him would only make it worse. Letitia stared at her daughter as though she'd become a stranger. I don't understand you. How can you be so calm about this? Prudence met her mother's gaze steadily. Because I came to a realization today. Charlton's choice wasn't about me at all. It was about him and what he wanted, and I refused to waste my energy mourning a future that was never real in the first place. Her mother opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and fled the room. Timothy squeezed Prudence's shoulder gently. You're stronger than you know. I don't feel strong. I feel tired. That's understandable. But Prudence, you handled that with remarkable dignity. Did I? Or am I simply numb? Perhaps both. There's no right way to feel about this. Prudence looked down at her hands, at the engagement ring she still wore. She pulled it off slowly and held it in her palm. What do I do with this? Whatever you choose. Keep it, return it, throw it in the river. It's yours to decide. She closed her fingers around the ring. Outside, she could hear voices on the street. The gossip was spreading, she knew. By morning, everyone in town would know that Prudence Everett had been jilted by the ambitious Charlton Radcliffe. They'll all be talking about it, she said quietly. Yes, they will. Does that bother you? I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow. Timothy smiled slightly. Fair enough. Come now, let's have some dinner. Your mother will recover in time, and so will you. Prudence stood and followed her father from the room, the ring still clutched in her hand. Chapter 6. Prudence woke the next morning to silence. Her mother had not come to her room, had not knocked on her door, had not called her down for breakfast. The quiet felt heavier than usual. She dressed carefully, choosing a plain brown dress instead of one of the lighter colors her mother preferred. She pinned her hair back simply and left her room without bothering to check her reflection. Downstairs, she found her father alone in the dining room, reading the newspaper over his coffee. Good morning, he said quietly. Your mother is still in her room. She says she has a headache. Prudence understood. Her mother was avoiding the world, avoiding the questions and the pitying looks that would come. "I'm going to the print shop." "I thought you might. There's work to be done on the Landy account." She ate a small breakfast and slipped out the back door, grateful to escape the suffocating silence of the house. The print shop welcomed her with its familiar smells and sounds. Prudence threw herself into the work, checking invoices, organizing papers, helping her father set type for the church bulletins. The hours passed in comfortable routine. Around mid-morning, Mrs. Pedersen appeared at the shop door. Prudence saw her through the window and felt her stomach tighten. "I'll handle it," her father said gently. Prudence nodded and moved to the back room where she couldn't be seen. She heard her father's voice, polite but firm, explaining that Prudence was occupied with urgent business. Mrs. Pedersen's voice carried through the thin walls, full of sympathy and curiosity. "Such a shame," she was saying. "Poor Prudence. Everyone is talking about it. To be cast aside like that, and for a Boston family no less. I do hope she's bearing up well." "She's managing," Timothy said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to complete." Mrs. Pedersen left, but she wasn't the last. Throughout the day, people found reasons to stop by the print shop. Some came with legitimate business, others with transparent excuses. All of them watched Prudence with a mixture of sympathy and fascination. Prudence kept her head down and her hands busy. She spoke politely when addressed, deflected personal questions with practiced ease, and retreated to the back room whenever possible. By late afternoon, she felt exhausted from the effort of remaining composed. When the last customer finally left, Timothy locked the shop door and turned to his daughter. "You did well today. I hid in the back room for half of it. That was wise, not cowardly. There's no shame in protecting yourself from unnecessary scrutiny." Prudence sat down heavily in the chair by the window. How long will it last? The gossip, the stares, the pitying looks? Until something more interesting happens, I suppose, or until people realize you're not going to provide them with a dramatic scene to discuss. "Mother wanted me to fight for him, to make a scene, to refuse to let him go." Your mother sees the world through the lens of social standing. To her, losing Charlton means losing status. She hasn't yet considered what you've lost, or whether what you lost was worth keeping. Prudence looked out the window at the street. A group of women stood talking on the corner, their heads close together. One of them glanced toward the print shop. "They're talking about me right now, aren't they?" "Probably. Does it bother you?" "Yes. And no, I hate being the subject of gossip. But I also don't care what they think nearly as much as I thought I would." "That's growth." Prudence stood and began tidying the papers on her father's desk. "I received an invitation this morning to Mrs. Landy's tea party next week. Mother was very excited about it when the engagement was still intact. Now I imagine she's mortified." "Will you go?" "No, I can't face a room full of women drinking tea and discussing my failed engagement. I'd rather stay here and help you with the accounts." "That's your choice to make." "Mother won't see it that way. She'll say I'm hiding, that I'm making matters worse by avoiding people." Timothy removed his spectacles and cleaned them carefully. "Prue, you need to understand something about your mother. She's not intentionally cruel, but she's been raised to believe that a woman's worth is measured by her marriage and social standing. Losing Charlton feels like a catastrophe to her because she genuinely believes it is one. And what do you believe? I believe you're better off without a man who values connections more than character. I believe hiding in the print shop for a few weeks while gossip dies down is perfectly reasonable. And I believe you're stronger than your mother gives you credit for." Prudence felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Father. Come now, let's finish up here and get you home." That evening at dinner, Letitia finally emerged from her room. She looked pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying. "I spoke with Mrs. Landy today," she said, pushing food around her plate without eating. She wanted to express her sympathy. "Apparently everyone knows by now." "I imagine they do," Prudence said quietly. "She also mentioned that Charlton has already left town, gone to Boston. He didn't even have the decency to wait a respectable period of time." Timothy set down his fork. Would waiting have made any difference? It would have shown some consideration for Prudence's reputation. Now it appears he couldn't escape fast enough. Prudence felt a flicker of what might have been hurt, but it passed quickly. It doesn't matter when he left. Of course it matters, don't you see? Every day he remains in town, people see his regret, his discomfort. When he flees immediately, it looks like he couldn't be bothered to care about the mess he's left behind. Mother, he didn't care. That's been clear for some time. Letitia's eyes filled with tears. How can you be so calm about this? Don't you understand what this means? You were engaged to be married to a promising young lawyer. Now you're a jilted woman. No one will want to court you now. No one respectable, anyway. Letitia, Timothy said warningly. But his wife continued, her voice rising. I'm sorry, but someone needs to say it. This is a disaster. All my plans, all my hopes for you, Prudence, gone. Because some Boston family dangled money in front of him, and he forgot all about his obligations. He didn't forget, Prudence said quietly. He simply decided his obligations to them were more important than his obligations to me. And honestly, Mother, I'm relieved he made that choice now rather than after we were married. Relieved? How can you possibly be relieved? Prudence set down her napkin and looked directly at her mother. Because I would rather be a jilted woman than a miserable wife. I would rather face gossip and pitying looks than spend my life with a man who sees me as an obstacle to his ambitions. But what will you do now? You can't just stay here forever, working in your father's shop like a spinster. Why not? Letitia stared at her daughter. Because that's not the life I wanted for you. No, Mother, it's not the life you wanted for yourself, but it might be exactly what I need right now. Her mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't listen to this. You're throwing away your future because of wounded pride. I'm not throwing away anything. I'm simply refusing to be pitied or reclaimed. Reclaimed? Who would reclaim you now? Prudence felt the words like a slap, but she kept her voice steady. No one, I hope. Because I'm not interested in being anyone's second choice or their consolation prize. I deserve better than that, even if you can't see it. Letitia's face crumpled. I only wanted what was best for you. You wanted what looked best. There's a difference. Her mother left the room without another word. Prudence heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard her bedroom door close. Timothy reached across the table and squeezed Prudence's hand. That took courage. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like honesty. Sometimes they're the same thing. Prudence looked at her father, at his kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. What if she's right? What if no one will want to court me now? What if I end up alone? Then you'll end up alone. But Prue, being alone is far better than being with the wrong person. And despite what your mother believes, your worth is not determined by whether some man chooses to marry you. Prudence nodded slowly. She didn't entirely believe him yet, but she wanted to. I'm going to stay home from church on Sunday, she said, and from Mrs. Landy's tea party. I'll go back out into the world when I'm ready, not when Mother thinks I should. That seems wise. She'll say I'm hiding. Perhaps you are, but there's nothing wrong with taking shelter while a storm passes. Prudence stood and began clearing the dishes. Outside, darkness had fallen. Somewhere in town, people were probably still discussing her broken engagement, dissecting every detail, speculating about what would become of poor Prudence Everett. But here in her father's house, in the quiet sanctuary of the dining room, Prudence felt something unexpected. She felt free. Chapter 7. 2 weeks after Charlton's departure, Prudence's routine had settled into a comfortable pattern. She spent her mornings at the print shop, her afternoons helping with household tasks, and her evenings reading by the fire. The gossip hadn't entirely died down, but it had at least quieted to a murmur. On a gray Tuesday morning, her father asked for help sorting through a large shipment of newspapers and periodicals that had arrived from various publishers. We need to organize these by type and date, he explained, gesturing to several crates stacked near the back of the shop. The newspapers go on the left shelf, the periodicals in the middle, and anything else we can set aside for now. Prudence settled into the work, finding it oddly soothing. There was a sense of satisfaction about bringing order to chaos, about creating neat stacks where there had been confusion. She worked through the local papers first, then moved on to publications from neighboring towns. Near the bottom of one crate, she found a thin newspaper she didn't recognize. The Matrimonial Times, the masthead read. Curious, Prudence opened it. The pages were filled with advertisements, not for goods or services, but for marriage. Column after column of men seeking wives, each entry a few lines describing the advertiser's situation and what he sought in a partner. Prudence had heard of such publications, of course. Women spoke of them in hushed tones, always with a mixture of fascination and disapproval. The idea of advertising for a spouse seemed desperate, almost scandalous. Yet she found herself reading. Prosperous merchant in Ohio seeks refined lady for companionship and marriage. Must be of good character and pleasant disposition. Gold miner in California, age 45, seeks hardy woman willing to share frontier life. No delicate sensibilities. Widower with 3 children requires capable housekeeper and mother. Must be practical and not given to romantic notions. That last one made Prudence pause. Not given to romantic notions. She'd been accused of that herself, or rather praised for it. Practical Prudence. Sensible Prudence. The woman who understood that marriage was a partnership, not a love story. She turned the page. More advertisements, each one a small window into a stranger's life. Some were brief and businesslike. Others were longer, more detailed. A few were almost poetic in their descriptions of the land they worked or the life they hoped to build. And then one caught her eye. Wheat farmer in Kansas seeks honest partnership. Widower, age 34, with young girl in my care. Life here is simple but good. The land is hard but fair. I'm not a man of fine words or grand promises. What I can offer is steady work, a decent home, and respect. I'm looking for a woman who values those more than polish or position. Someone who understands that building a life takes effort from both parties. If you're seeking partnership rather than rescue, and if honest work doesn't frighten you, I'd welcome your letter. Mortimer Chase, Rural Route 3, Oak Ridge, Kansas. Prudence read it twice. There was something different about this one. No promises of prosperity or comfort, no requirements for beauty or refinement, just an honest assessment of what life would be like and what he could offer. Partnership rather than rescue. She set the paper down and returned to sorting, but her mind kept drifting back to those words. Partnership, respect, honest work. Charlton had never spoken of partnership. He'd spoken of position, advancement, strategic marriages. Her mother spoke of security and social standing. Even her father, kind as he was, spoke mostly of duty and dignity. But partnership, the word felt different somehow. Prudence finished sorting the newspapers and moved to the periodicals. She worked steadily for another hour, but when she glanced at the table where she'd left the Matrimonial Times, she found herself walking over and picking it up again. She read the advertisement a 3rd time. It was probably a terrible idea. Women who answered such advertisements were desperate or foolish or both. They were running from something or chasing a fantasy. They ended up in situations they couldn't have imagined, with men who weren't what they claimed to be. But then again, she'd nearly married Charlton. She'd convinced herself that a man who valued her for being sensible and steady was making a good match. How had that worked out? Prudence looked around the shop. Her father was in the front room, speaking with a customer. No one was watching. She pulled a scrap of paper and a pencil from the drawer and carefully copied the address. Mortimer Chase, Rural Route 3, Oak Ridge, Kansas. Then she folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. Prudence? Her father's voice came from the front room. Could you help me with this invoice? Coming, father. She set the Matrimonial Times back on the table with the other sorted publications and went to help. But all afternoon, she felt the weight of that folded paper in her pocket. That evening after dinner, Prudence sat in her room with a blank sheet of paper in front of her. She'd told herself she was just going to write a letter, that there was no harm in writing. She didn't have to send it. But what would she even say? Dear Mr. Chase, I saw your advertisement seeking a partner. I'm a recently jilted woman from New York who is hiding from gossip and trying to determine what her life should look like now. Would that interest you? She crumpled the paper and started again. Dear Mr. Chase, I read your notice in the Matrimonial Times. I appreciated your honesty about what you could offer and what you sought. I wonder if you might tell me more about your farm and the girl in your care. Too forward, too presumptuous. Prudence set down her pen and stared at the blank page. What was she doing? This was absurd. She couldn't possibly write to a stranger in Kansas. She couldn't possibly consider leaving her home, her family, all that was familiar. Except that all that was familiar had become suffocating. The gossip, the pitying looks, her mother's disappointment, the constant reminder that she was now damaged goods, that her prospects had diminished, that she should be grateful if any respectable man would have her now. She picked up the pen again. Dear Mr. Chase, I came across your notice in the Matrimonial Times and found myself drawn to your honest words. You spoke of partnership and respect, which seemed to me the foundation of any worthwhile marriage. I'm 22 years old, educated, and accustomed to work. I've spent most of my life helping in my father's print shop, managing accounts and correspondence. I understand the value of honest labor and don't expect life to be easy or comfortable. I was recently engaged to be married, but the engagement was broken. I mention this not to garner sympathy, but to be honest about my circumstances. I'm writing to you not out of desperation, but out of a desire to choose my own path forward. If you would be willing to tell me more about your situation and what you seek in a partner, I would welcome your response. She paused, pen hovering over the page. Should she sign her full name? Just her first name? In the end, she wrote simply, Prudence Everett. She read the letter 3 times, made a few small corrections, and then copied it onto a fresh sheet in her neatest handwriting. Before she could change her mind, she folded it, addressed an envelope, and sealed it. Then she tucked it into her pocket and sat staring at the wall. Tomorrow she would decide whether to mail it. Tonight, she would simply hold on to the possibility that somewhere in Kansas, there might be a man who valued partnership over position and honesty over polish. And that perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly what she needed. Chapter 8. Mortimer Chase woke before dawn, as he always did. The farmhouse was quiet except for the soft breathing of Liza in the room next to his. He dressed in the darkness, pulling on work clothes worn soft from years of use, and made his way to the kitchen. The stove was cold. He built a fire, set water to boil for coffee, and began preparing breakfast. Oatmeal with a bit of honey. Bread from the loaf he'd baked 2 days earlier. Simple food, but filling. By the time Liza appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, the kitchen was warm and the meal was ready. "Good morning," he said. "Morning." She climbed onto her chair and waited while he served her breakfast. Her light hair was tangled from sleep, and he made a mental note to help her brush it before she went to school. They ate in comfortable silence. Liza was not a talkative child in the mornings, and Mortimer had never been one for unnecessary words. After breakfast, he helped her get ready for the day. He'd learned to braid her hair passably well, though it never looked as neat as when Mrs. Hardy from the neighboring farm helped out. He packed her lunch, checked that she had her schoolwork, and walked with her to the end of the drive where she'd meet the Hardy children for the walk to the schoolhouse. "Be good," he said. "I will." She paused, looking up at him. "Are you lonely, Mortimer?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Mrs. Hardy said you must be lonely. She said it's not natural for a man to live without a wife." Mortimer considered his words carefully. Liza was observant, always had been. She deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes I am, but I have you, and the farm keeps me busy." "But you're not happy." "I'm content." "That's not the same." No, it wasn't. But how did you explain to a 7-year-old that happiness felt like something that belonged to other people? Those 3 years of grief had taught him to settle for getting through each day? "I'm working on it," he said finally. "Now go on, or you'll be late." He watched her walk down the road until she met up with the Hardy children, then returned to the farmhouse. The kitchen needed cleaning. The accounts needed checking. The fence in the north field needed mending. The work never ended. By mid-morning, he was in the wheat field, checking the crop. The plants were growing well, the heads beginning to form. If the weather held, it would be a good harvest. Not exceptional, but solid. Enough to get through winter with some left over to sell. He worked steadily through the day, stopping only briefly for a cold lunch. The physical labor was good. It kept his mind occupied, kept him from thinking too much about the empty house or the silence that filled it when Lisa was at school. But lately, the silence had been weighing on him more than usual. He'd been alone for 3 years now. 3 years since Sandra had died of the fever that swept through the county. They'd only been married 2 years when it happened. Not long enough to build the life they'd planned, but long enough for her loss to leave a hole. After Sandra's death, he'd taken in Lisa, his wife's younger sister, orphaned when their parents died. She'd been 4 years old, frightened and grieving. He'd been 21, grieving himself and barely able to keep his own head above water. But they'd managed. He'd learned to cook and clean and braid hair. She'd learned that he was steady, that he wouldn't leave her. They'd built something together, the two of them. Not a traditional family, but a family nonetheless. Still, there were moments when the loneliness hit him hard. Evenings after Liza went to bed and he sat alone by the fire. Mornings when he woke and reached across the bed to find it empty. Times when he wanted to share something with someone who understood the rhythm of this life. 3 weeks ago, he'd done something he never thought he would do. He'd placed an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. The decision hadn't come easily. It felt like admitting defeat somehow, like announcing to the world that he couldn't manage on his own. But Mrs. Hardy had been right about one thing. It wasn't natural to live alone. And Liza needed more than he could give her. She needed a woman's guidance, someone who could teach her the things he didn't know how to teach. He'd written the advertisement carefully, determined to be honest. No false promises. No romantic language he didn't mean. Just the plain truth about what life here was like and what he could offer. Partnership. That's what he wanted. Someone who understood that building a life together required work from both people. Someone who wouldn't expect him to be anyone he wasn't. He hadn't received any responses yet. Part of him was relieved. What would he even say if someone wrote, "How did you begin a conversation about marriage with a stranger?" By late afternoon, he collected Liza from the Hardy farm where she went after school. She chattered about her day while they walked home together, and he listened, grateful for her company. They had a simple dinner together. Stew he'd made the day before, warmed over the stove, bread and butter. Liza told him about a problem in her arithmetic lesson, and he helped her work through it at the kitchen table. After she went to bed, Mortimer sat by the fire with his coffee, watching the flames and thinking about the advertisement. Maybe no one would respond. Maybe it had been a foolish thing to do. The next morning, he rode into town to collect supplies. The general store also served as the post office, and he'd gotten into the habit of checking for mail even though he rarely received any. Today, there was a letter. Mortimer recognized the handwriting as feminine, the address written in careful script, his name and the rural route number, exactly as he'd listed in the advertisement. He paid for his supplies, tucked the letter in his coat pocket, and rode home before opening it. In the quiet of his kitchen, with Liza still at school, he sat down at the table and broke the seal. The letter was brief but thoughtful. Prudence Everett, 22 years old, from New York. She mentioned working at her father's print shop, managing accounts and correspondence. She'd been engaged, but it was broken. Mortimer read the letter twice. There was no false sentiment in it, no dramatic declarations or unrealistic expectations. She wrote plainly, honestly. She mentioned her broken engagement not as a plea for sympathy, but as a fact. She wanted to choose her own path forward. He appreciated that, appreciated the honesty of it. Most women who answered such advertisements were desperate or running from something. This woman sounded neither desperate nor on the run. She sounded like someone making a deliberate choice. He set the letter on the table and stared at it for a long moment. He could write back, or he could let it go, continue as he had been. Liza would grow up eventually. He'd manage somehow. But as he sat there in the quiet kitchen, he found himself reaching for paper and pen. If nothing else, he could answer her questions honestly. Tell her what life here was really like. Let her make an informed decision about whether to continue the correspondence. He began to write. Dear Miss Everett, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your honesty about your circumstances. I believe honesty is the only foundation worth building on. You asked about my situation, I farm wheat on 160 acres. The land is good, but requires constant work. The house is simple but solid. I built most of it myself after my wife died. Liza is 7 years old. She's my late wife's sister, but I've raised her since she was 4. She's a good child, bright and curious. She needs someone who can teach her the things I cannot. I won't pretend life here is easy. Winters are hard, the work never stops, but there's satisfaction in it, and the land rewards honest effort. If you're looking for comfort or excitement, this isn't the place. But if you value honest work and straightforward dealing, we might suit each other well. He paused, considering how to end the letter. Finally, he wrote simply, I welcome your reply if you're still interested in corresponding. Mortimer Chase. He sealed the letter before he could change his mind and set it aside to mail the next day. Outside, the sun was setting over the wheat fields. Mortimer stood at the window, watching the light change, and allowed himself to hope, just a little, that maybe the silence wouldn't last forever. Chapter 9. Prudence waited 2 weeks for Mortimer's reply. 2 weeks during which she went about her daily routine while wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Perhaps he'd read her letter and decided she wasn't suitable. Perhaps he'd found someone else. Perhaps the whole idea had been foolish from the start. Then one afternoon, her father returned from town with a letter. This came for you, he said, handing it to her. From Kansas. Prudence took it with unsteady hands and retreated to her room before opening it. His handwriting was clear and steady. He thanked her for her honesty. He described his farm, his life, and Liza with straightforward simplicity. No false promises, no romantic language, just the plain truth. Prudence read the letter 3 times, then sat down to write her response. Over the next 2 months, letters traveled back and forth between New York and Kansas. Prudence learned that Mortimer rose before dawn every day, that he'd built most of his house himself, that Liza loved arithmetic but struggled with reading, that winter on the plains could be harsh but beautiful. She told him about the print shop, about managing accounts and setting type, about her love of order and the satisfaction of seeing work completed properly. She didn't hide her broken engagement or pretend to be something she wasn't. In his 3rd letter, Mortimer asked what she valued most in life. Prudence thought carefully before answering. Honesty, she wrote, the ability to choose my own path, work that matters, partnership between equals. His response came quickly. Those are good values to build on. She found herself looking forward to his letters in a way she'd never looked forward to Charlton's visits. Mortimer's words felt solid, reliable. He asked questions and actually seemed interested in her answers. He didn't tell her what to think or how to feel. He simply listened, responded, and shared his own thoughts in return. When she mentioned her love of organizing systems and keeping accurate records, he didn't dismiss it as unimportant. Instead, he wrote, the farm accounts need better management. I keep them, but I'm not skilled at it. A partner who understood bookkeeping would be valuable. Valuable. Not decorative. Not sensible in a way that meant boring. Valuable. In her 5th letter, Prudence asked about his late wife. Sandra was kind, Mortimer wrote. We married young. I thought we'd have decades together. Her death taught me that life offers no guarantees, but it also taught me to value honesty and not waste time on pretense. Prudence appreciated that. No romanticizing the past, no claims that he was over his grief completely, just the truth, plainly stated. She told him about Charlton in her next letter, not in detail, but enough to explain why she was cautious, why she needed to know that she was chosen for who she was, not what she represented. I won't pretend to understand all that happened between you and your former intended, Mortimer wrote back. But I can tell you this, I have no interest in position or status. I need a partner who can share the work and the decisions, someone who won't expect me to be other than I am, and who I can accept for who she is. If you can value that kind of partnership, then we might suit each other well. Prudence read those words until she'd memorized them. She carried the letter in her pocket for days, pulling it out whenever doubt crept in. By their 7th exchange of letters, they were writing about practical matters. What would her duties be? How would decisions be made? What about Liza's education? What did he expect from a wife? Mortimer's answers were direct. They would share decisions about the farm and household. Liza's education was important, and he hoped Prudence would help with her reading. As for what he expected, he wrote honesty, effort, willingness to build something together. I'm not looking for someone to serve me or someone to rescue. I'm looking for a partner. Prudence felt a shift inside her chest as she read those words. For the first time since Charlton had left, she felt seen, not as a social asset or a domestic convenience, but as a person with value in her own right. She wrote back immediately. Those expectations seem fair and reasonable. I want the same. Partnership built on mutual respect and honest effort. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I value straightforward dealing more than romantic gestures. His response came 3 weeks later. The delay made her anxious, wondering if she'd said something wrong. But when the letter finally arrived, she understood the reason for the wait. Miss Everett, I've given considerable thought to our correspondence over these past months. Your letters have shown me a woman of intelligence, honesty, and practical sense. You understand what life here would be like, and you haven't shied away from the truth of it. I believe we could build a good life together. Not perfect, not easy, but good, based on shared work and mutual respect. If you're willing, I would like to ask you to become my wife. I want to be clear about what I'm offering and what I'm not. This isn't a romantic proposal. I won't promise passion or poetry. What I can promise is partnership, respect, and honest effort to build something worthwhile together. I'm also aware that this is a significant decision that will change your entire life. You would be leaving everything familiar and traveling to a place you've never seen to marry a man you've never met. I don't take that lightly, so I'm asking you to consider carefully. If you need more time or if you have more questions, please write back. And if you decide this isn't what you want, I'll respect that decision completely. You're under no obligation to accept. But if you do accept, know that I will do whatever is in my power to ensure you don't regret the choice. The decision is entirely yours. Mortimer Chase Prudence read the letter 4 times. Then she walked to the print shop, where her father was working late. Father, may I speak with you? Timothy looked up from his press and studied her face. This looks serious. It is. She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then set it down on his workbench. Well, this is unexpected. Is it foolish? That depends. Do you want to accept? Prudence looked at her father's ink-stained hands, at the familiar shop around her, at everything she'd known her entire life. I think I do. Why? Because he sees me as a partner, not as an ornament or a convenience. Because he values my abilities rather than just tolerating them. Because he's honest about what he can offer and what he cannot. She paused. And because staying here means remaining the jilted daughter everyone pities. Going to Kansas means choosing something for myself. Timothy nodded slowly. Those are good reasons. But it's also terrifying. I'd be leaving everything I know, marrying a stranger, building a life in a place I've never seen. Yes, you would. He cleaned his spectacles thoughtfully. Prue, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. Sometimes the things most worth having require the most courage to choose. That evening, Prudence sat at her desk and wrote her response. Her hand was steady, her words clear. Dear Mr. Chase, I accept your proposal. I appreciate your honesty about what you can and cannot offer. I'm not looking for romantic promises or grand gestures. I'm looking for exactly what you've described. Partnership built on respect and shared effort. I understand this will be a significant change, and I'm prepared for that. I'm not coming to Kansas to escape my past or to be rescued. I'm coming because I believe we can build something worthwhile together. I would like to arrive before winter, if possible. Please let me know what arrangements need to be made. Prudence Everett. She sealed the letter before she could reconsider and placed it with her father's outgoing mail. The decision was made. Chapter 10. Mortimer's reply arrived 2 weeks after Prudence sent her acceptance. The letter was brief but practical. He included money for the train fare and suggested she arrive in mid-September, before the weather turned. He would meet her at the station in Oak Ridge. Prudence read the letter 3 times, then tucked it carefully into her drawer with the others. The reality of what she'd agreed to was settling over her like a weight. She was leaving. Actually leaving. That evening at dinner, Prudence set down her fork and looked at her parents. I have something to tell you. Timothy glanced up from his plate. Letitia continued cutting her meat. I've accepted a proposal of marriage. I'll be leaving for Kansas in 6 weeks. Her mother's knife clattered against her plate. What did you say? I'm getting married. To a farmer in Kansas. His name is Mortimer Chase. Letitia stared at her daughter as though she'd announced plans to join the circus. Kansas? You've never even mentioned anyone from Kansas. We've been corresponding for several months, through the post. Corresponding? Her mother's voice rose. You mean you've been writing to a stranger? Yes. Prudence, this is madness. You can't possibly marry someone you've never met. Someone from Kansas of all places. Letitia turned to her husband. Timothy, tell her she's being ridiculous. Timothy was watching Prudence carefully. How did this correspondence begin? I answered an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. Her mother gasped. A mail order arrangement? Absolutely not. I forbid it. Mother, I'm 22 years old. You can't forbid me anything. Letitia stood abruptly. This is because of Charlton, isn't it? You're running away out of spite. I'm not running away. I'm choosing to leave. To marry a farmer you've never met. Do you have any idea what life is like for a farmer's wife? The work, the isolation, the hardship? Yes, Mother. We've discussed it extensively in our letters. Letters. Letitia threw her hands up. Anyone can write pleasant letters. You have no idea who this man really is. Prudence kept her voice calm. I know he's honest. I know he values partnership and respects my abilities. I know he's raising a young girl on his own and managing a farm. That's more than I knew about Charlton when we became engaged. Charlton was a lawyer with a future. This man is a farmer in Kansas. Do you understand what you're giving up? I'm not giving up anything worth keeping. Her mother's face flushed. You're throwing away your life because one man disappointed you. This is exactly what people warned would happen. A broken engagement makes a woman desperate and foolish. Letitia, Timothy said quietly, but his wife ignored him. What will people say? First jilted by Charlton, now running off to Kansas to marry a stranger. They'll say you've lost your mind. Let them say what they like. I'm done living for what other people think. Well, I won't allow it. I simply won't. Prudence met her mother's gaze steadily. You don't have a choice. I've already accepted. The arrangements are made. Letitia turned to her husband, her eyes filling with tears. Timothy, please, talk some sense into her. Timothy set down his napkin and looked at Prudence. May I see his letters? Prudence retrieved them from her room and handed the stack to her father. He read through them methodically while Letitia paced the dining room, occasionally letting out small sounds of distress. Finally, Timothy set the letters down. These are honest letters, direct, no false promises. You can't possibly think this is a good idea, Letitia said. I think it's Prudence's decision to make. She's making a terrible mistake. Perhaps, but it's her mistake to make. He looked at Prudence. Are you certain this is what you want? Prudence nodded. I am. Then I support your choice. Letitia sank into her chair. I can't believe what I'm hearing. My own husband encouraging our daughter to throw her life away. I'm not throwing my life away, Prudence said quietly. I'm choosing a different path than the one you wanted for me. That doesn't make it wrong. It makes it foolish. Maybe, but it's my choice. Her mother stood and left the room without another word. Prudence heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard her bedroom door close. Timothy reached across the table and squeezed Prudence's hand. She'll come around, eventually. Will she? She loves you in her way. She's frightened. Change frightens her. I'm frightened too. I know, but you're doing it anyway. That takes courage. Prudence looked at her father's kind face. Will you help me prepare? I don't know what I'll need. Of course. Over the next 6 weeks, Prudence quietly organized her departure. She packed her clothes, taking only what was practical. She sold the few pieces of jewelry she owned, including the engagement ring, and saved the money. She helped her father train someone to take over her duties at the print shop. Letitia barely spoke to her. When they passed in the hallway, her mother looked away. At meals, she addressed her comments to Timothy as though Prudence wasn't present. Prudence tried not to let it hurt. Mrs. Pedersen came to call one afternoon. Prudence was sorting through books, deciding which to take with her. when her mother showed the visitor into the parlor. I heard the most extraordinary rumor, Mrs. Pedersen began. Someone said you were planning to leave town, to go west of all places. Prudence looked up from her books. It's not a rumor. I'm leaving for Kansas in 3 weeks. Kansas, Mrs. Pedersen's eyes widened. Whatever for? I'm getting married. Married, but I thought after Charlton, she trailed off delicately. I'm marrying a farmer, Mortimer Chase. We've been corresponding. Mrs. Pedersen sat down heavily. A farmer, through correspondence. She fanned herself. Well, this is unexpected. Yes. And you're quite certain about this? I am. After Mrs. Pedersen left, Prudence could hear her mother crying in her room. She stood outside the door for a long moment, hand raised to knock, but in the end, she walked away. 2 days before her departure, Prudence was packing the last of her belongings when her mother appeared in the doorway. May I come in? Of course. Letitia entered slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked older than Prudence had ever seen her, her face drawn with worry and sleeplessness. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said finally. I know. I wanted so much for you. A good marriage, a respectable position in society, security. I know you did. And you're throwing it all away for a man you've never met, in a place I can't even imagine. Her voice broke. What if something happens to you? What if you need help? Then I'll manage, the same way Mortimer has managed since his wife died. Letitia twisted her handkerchief in her hands. I won't pretend to approve of this. I think you're making a terrible mistake. I understand. But you're my daughter, and I love you, even if you don't believe that right now. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused. I wish you could see yourself the way your father does. The way I imagine this farmer does. Strong and capable and worthy of being chosen for who you are, not what you represent. Prudence felt tears prick her eyes. Mother, I can't give you my blessing, but I can give you this. She pressed a small purse into Prudence's hand. Money I've been saving, not much, but it's yours. Mother, I can't. Take it, please. It will make me feel better to know you have something set aside. Prudence clutched the purse. Thank you. Letitia nodded once and left the room. On her last morning, Prudence stood in the print shop with her father. The familiar smell of ink and paper surrounded her. She ran her hand along the counter where she'd spent so many hours working. I'm going to miss this place, she said. It will miss you too. Timothy handed her a wrapped package. Something to take with you. Prudence unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a blank ledger, bound in leather, with her initials embossed on the cover. For keeping accounts on the farm, he said, every partnership needs good records. Prudence hugged her father tightly. Thank you for everything, for understanding, for supporting my choice. You're braver than you know, he said, and you're going to be fine. At the station, both her parents stood on the platform. Letitia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Timothy held Prudence's bag. When the train whistle blew, Prudence embraced her mother. I'll write, she promised. You'd better, Letitia said, her voice thick with tears. Prudence turned to her father. He squeezed her hand once, firmly. Trust yourself, he said. You're making the right choice for the right reasons. Prudence boarded the train and found a seat by the window. As the train began to move, she watched her parents grow smaller on the platform. Her mother was crying openly now. Her father had his arm around his wife's shoulders. Prudence pressed her hand to the window glass and watched until they disappeared from view. Then she turned forward, toward Kansas, toward Mortimer, toward whatever life awaited her there. Chapter 11. The train pulled out of the station with a shudder and a blast of steam. Prudence sat by the window, watching the buildings of New York grow smaller and then disappear entirely. The landscape opened up before her, rolling hills and farmlands stretching toward the horizon. She was really doing this. The first day passed in a blur of changing scenery. Prudence shared her compartment with a young couple traveling to Ohio. They were newly married, full of plans and excitement about starting a farm together. They spoke little to Prudence, caught up in each other and their dreams. At the first major stop, they disembarked. A middle-aged woman took their place, traveling alone with 2 large trunks. Going far? The woman asked as she settled into her seat. Kansas. Ah, I'm only going as far as Pennsylvania, my sister's place. She arranged her skirts carefully. Running to something or from something? Prudence considered the question. Both, I suppose. The woman nodded as though this made perfect sense. Most people on these trains are. I'm running from a house that's too empty since my husband passed, running to a sister who needs help with her children. She paused. What about you? I'm getting married to a farmer. You don't sound entirely certain about it. I've never met him. We've only corresponded through letters. The woman's eyebrows rose. That takes courage or desperation. Which is it? I'm not sure yet. Well, at least you're honest about it. The woman pulled out her knitting. I'll tell you something, though. Most marriages start with people who think they know each other and find out they don't. You're starting with the truth that you don't know him. That's more honest than most. Prudence thought about that as the miles rolled past. At the next stop, the woman departed. A man in his 30s took her place, carrying a worn satchel and looking exhausted. Excuse me, he said, settling into his seat. Long journey ahead? Kansas, he whistled. I'm only going to Illinois, starting over there. Lost my shop in a fire back east. Insurance didn't cover half of it. He shook his head. Sometimes life forces your hand. Sometimes it does, Prudence agreed. They rode in silence for a while. Then the man spoke again. You look worried. First time heading west? Yes. It's not as frightening as people make it out to be. The land's different. The pace is different. But people are still people. Work is still work. He looked out the window. Sometimes starting over is the best thing that can happen to you, even if it doesn't feel that way at first. That evening, Prudence pulled out Mortimer's letters. She'd read them so many times that the paper was beginning to wear soft at the creases. But she read them again anyway, looking for reassurance. I'm not looking for someone to serve me or someone to rescue. I'm looking for a partner. If you value honest work and straightforward dealing, we might suit each other well. The decision is entirely yours. She folded the letters carefully and tucked them back into her bag. Outside the window, darkness had fallen. Small towns passed by, lit windows glowing warm against the night. The second day brought new companions. A woman traveling with 3 young children, heading to Missouri to join her husband, who'd gone ahead to find work. The children were restless and noisy. Their mother looked exhausted. I'm sorry, the woman said as her youngest began to cry. They're tired of being cooped up. It's all right, Prudence said. She found herself helping to entertain the children, telling them stories and playing simple games. It reminded her of working with Liza in her mind, the girl she'd soon meet. By the 3rd day, Prudence had lost count of how many people had shared her compartment. Each one had a story. Each one was leaving something behind and moving towards something new. A young man heading west to try mining. An older couple going to live with their son after losing their farm. A woman who said very little, but whose eyes held a sadness that needed no explanation. They were all starting over. All of them carrying hope mixed with fear. All of them trusting that the unknown ahead might be better than what they'd left behind. Prudence realized she wasn't alone in this. The world was full of people making difficult choices, taking risks, hoping for better. On the 4th day, doubt crept in. What if she'd made a mistake? What if Mortimer wasn't the man his letters suggested? What if she couldn't manage farm life? What if Liza didn't like her? What if she'd thrown away everything familiar for a future that would only disappoint? She pulled out the letters again. This time she read them differently, looking for warning signs she might have missed. But there was nothing false in them, just honesty, plain and direct. I believe we could build a good life together. Not perfect, not easy, but good. Prudence tucked the letters away and watched the landscape change outside her window. The land was flatter now, the horizon wider. This was the prairie Mortimer had described. On the 5th day, the train pulled into Kansas. Prudence gathered her belongings, her hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. This was it. No turning back now. She stepped off the train onto the platform at Oak Ridge. The air smelled different here, drier and warmer than New York. The sky seemed bigger somehow, stretching endlessly in all directions. The platform was nearly empty. A few people hurried past, going about their business. Prudence stood with her bags, scanning the faces around her, and then she saw him. A tall man, broad-shouldered, weathered by sun and work. He stood near the station building, his hat in his hands, watching the train passengers with a careful, reserved expression. Their eyes met. He took a step forward, then hesitated, as though asking permission to approach. Prudence felt something settle in her chest, not the wild excitement she'd once felt with Charlton. Something quieter, more solid, something that felt like recognition. She picked up her bags and walked toward him. "Mr. Chase?" His voice was deep and steady. "Welcome to Kansas." She set down her bags and looked at him properly. Brown eyes, calm and assessing. A face marked by work and weather. Hands that looked strong and capable. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course." He picked up her bags as though they weighed nothing. "The wagon's just over here. Liza's at the Hardy farm. I thought it might be better to let you settle in first before meeting her." "That's thoughtful." They walked to the wagon in silence. Mortimer helped her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her. He gathered the reins, but didn't immediately set the horses moving. "I want you to know," he said, looking straight ahead, "that nothing has to be decided right away. You can take time to see the farm, meet Liza, and figure out if this is what you want. If it's not, I'll make sure you have passage back east." Prudence looked at his profile, at the set of his jaw and the steadiness in his bearing. "Thank you. That means a great deal." He nodded once, then clicked to the horses. As they left the town behind and headed toward open prairie, Prudence felt the last of her doubt fall away. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if this would work or if she'd made the right choice. But she knew this. She'd chosen it herself. Not because it was expected or because it looked good to others. She'd chosen it because it felt true, and that, she thought as the wagon rolled across the Kansas plains, was enough. Chapter 12. The farmhouse came into view as they crested a small rise. It was simple but solid, just as Mortimer had described. White-painted wood, a covered porch, windows that caught the afternoon sun. Behind it stretched fields of wheat, golden and rippling in the breeze. "That's home," Mortimer said. Prudence looked at the house, at the land surrounding it, at the sky that seemed to stretch forever. It was so different from New York, so open, so quiet. "It's nice," she said. "It's not much," he replied, "but it's sound. The roof doesn't leak. The stove works well. I added the porch 2 years back." "You built it yourself?" "Most of it. The Hardys helped with the raising." They pulled up in front of the house. Mortimer climbed down and offered his hand to help Prudence from the wagon. His grip was firm and steady. "I'll show you around," he said, carrying her bags toward the house. "You'll have your own room. It's small, but there's a window and space for your belongings." Inside, the house was neat and sparse. The main room held a table, chairs, a stove, and a few basic furnishings. Everything was clean but clearly functional rather than decorative. Mortimer led her down a short hallway. "That's my room. That one's Liza's, and this will be yours." The room he showed her was indeed small, but it had a bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, and a window looking out over the wheat fields. Someone had left a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. "Mrs. Hardy picked those," Mortimer said. "She helped me get the room ready." That was kind of her. She's a good neighbor. He set Prudence's bags down by the bed. "I'll give you time to settle in. When you're ready, we'll go collect Liza." Prudence unpacked slowly, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her belongings in the dresser. She placed her father's ledger on top, running her hand over the leather cover. Through the window, she could see Mortimer in the yard, checking something on the wagon. He moved with purpose, each action deliberate and efficient. No wasted motion. When she returned to the main room, Mortimer was waiting by the door. "Ready?" he asked. They rode to the Hardy farm in silence. Prudence found it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Mortimer didn't seem to feel the need to fill every moment with conversation. The Hardy farm was larger than Mortimer's, with several outbuildings and a bigger house. A woman came out onto the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mortimer, you're back." She smiled warmly at Prudence. "And this must be Miss Everett." "Prudence, this is Mrs. Hardy. Please call me Sarah." The woman studied Prudence with kind but assessing eyes. "Welcome to Kansas. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was long, but not difficult." "Because this would be your home too. It's important that you're comfortable with whatever we decide." Liza studied Prudence for a long moment. Then she said, "You look tired." Prudence smiled. "I am a bit. It was a very long train ride." "Mrs. Hardy made bread. Would you like some?" "I would, thank you." Liza led Prudence to the table and showed her where to sit. The other Hardy girls watched shyly as Liza cut a thick slice of bread and handed it to Prudence with great seriousness. "Thank you, Liza. This looks wonderful." The girl nodded and returned to her own seat, but she kept glancing at Prudence as though trying to figure something out. They stayed for an hour. Prudence helped the girls clean up from their baking, while Mortimer and Mr. Hardy discussed crops and weather. When it was time to leave, Liza gathered her small bag of belongings without complaint. On the ride back to Mortimer's farm, Liza sat between them on the wagon seat. She was quiet, occasionally stealing looks at Prudence when she thought no one was noticing. "You can ask me questions if you want," Prudence said gently. Liza was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know how to read?" "Yes, I love reading. Mortimer's been teaching me, but I'm not very good at it. Maybe I could help, if you'd like." Liza nodded slowly. "Maybe." That evening, after a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and cold chicken that Mrs. Hardy had sent home with them, Mortimer helped Liza get ready for bed. Prudence could hear him in Liza's room, his low voice patient as he listened to her read a few halting sentences from a primer. When he returned to the main room, Prudence was cleaning up from dinner. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I don't mind." He picked up a towel and dried the dishes she washed. They worked in silence for a few minutes. "She seems cautious," Prudence said finally. "She is. She's lost a lot of people in her short life. She's learned to be careful about letting new people in." "That's understandable." Mortimer set down the dish he was drying. "I want to be clear about something. I know we discussed marriage in our letters, but now that you're here, I think we should take time. Let you get used to the place. Let Liza get comfortable with you. Make sure this is truly what you want before we make any permanent decisions." Prudence met his gaze. "I appreciate that. You're not obligated in any way. If you decide this isn't right, I'll make sure you have passage back east. No questions, no judgment." "And what about you? What if you decide I'm not right for this life?" "Then I'll tell you honestly, but I won't leave you stranded." Prudence dried her hands on a towel. "How long should we take?" "As long as we need. A few weeks at least. Maybe a month. There's no rush." "What will people think? Me living here unmarried?" "Mrs. Hardy will explain the situation to anyone who asks. This is a small community, but people understand that mail order arrangements sometimes need time to work out properly." Prudence nodded slowly. "All right, we'll take time." "Good." Mortimer hung up the towel. "I'll be up before dawn tomorrow. Farm work starts early. You can help if you want, or take time to settle in. Whatever feels right. I'd like to help. That's why I came. Then I'll wake you when I'm up." Prudence went to her room and lay down on the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the house settling. Mortimer moving quietly in his room. Liza shifting in her sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about the day, about Mortimer's steadiness and Liza's wariness and the vast Kansas sky. This was her life now. Or it could be, if she chose it, if they all chose it. She turned on her side and looked out the window at the wheat fields silhouetted against the darkening sky. It wasn't what she'd expected, but then again, she wasn't sure what she'd expected. What she knew was this: Mortimer had been honest with her. Liza needed time. The work would be hard, and somewhere in all of that, there might be something worth building. That was enough for tonight. Chapter 13. Prudence woke to darkness and the sound of movement in the house. She dressed quickly and found Mortimer in the kitchen, building up the fire in the stove. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's almost ready. What can I do? I'll show you." The first week passed in a rhythm of work. Mortimer taught her the layout of the farm, the routines that kept everything running. Prudence learned to collect eggs from the hen house, to pump water from the well, and to manage the kitchen stove so it held steady heat through the day. She made bread, following instructions Mortimer had written down in his careful hand. The first loaf came out heavy and dense. The second was better. By the fourth, Mortimer nodded his approval. "That's good bread," he said simply. Prudence found satisfaction in the work. It was different from the print shop, but it required the same attention to detail, the same steady effort. Nothing got done unless you did it. On the third morning, Prudence noticed the account ledger on the kitchen shelf. It was worn and stuffed with loose papers. "May I look at this?" she asked. Mortimer glanced up from mending a harness. "If you want." Prudence opened it carefully. The entries were accurate but disorganized. Income and expenses were mixed. There was no system for tracking what had been paid or what was still owed. That evening, after Liza had gone to bed, Prudence cleared the kitchen table and spread out the papers. "This won't take long," she said. "I just need to organize it properly." Mortimer watched from his chair by the fire as Prudence sorted through months of receipts and notes. She worked methodically, creating columns, transferring information into her father's ledger, and cross-checking numbers. After an hour, she had a clear picture of the farm's finances. The numbers were solid but tight. There was enough to get through winter if the harvest held, but not much margin for unexpected costs. "You're good at that," Mortimer said quietly. Prudence looked up. "It's what I did at my father's shop, keeping accounts, managing correspondence." "It shows." The next day, Prudence wrote letters to the suppliers whose bills were still outstanding, confirming payment dates and negotiating slightly better terms where possible. Mortimer read them over before she sealed them. "These are well written," he said. "Thank you." Sandra was never comfortable with this part of the farm. She tried, but numbers made her anxious. He paused. "I've been managing it myself since she passed, getting by but not doing it well. It's easier when you have a system. Once it's set up, it's just a matter of keeping it current." Mortimer nodded slowly. "I can see that now." Prudence noticed him watching her work over the following days. Not obviously, but she'd catch his glance when she was organizing the pantry or checking the henhouse for eggs or reviewing the supply order before it went to town. His expression was thoughtful, assessing. She wondered what he was thinking, but didn't ask. Liza was slower to warm up. She wasn't unfriendly, but she kept a careful distance. She answered Prudence's questions politely. She helped with small tasks when asked. But there was a reserve in her manner, a watchfulness. On the fifth day, Prudence found Liza sitting on the porch steps with her reading primer, struggling through a passage about a farm family. "May I sit with you?" Prudence asked. Liza shrugged, which Prudence took as permission. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Prudence said, "Would you read to me?" Liza read haltingly, stumbling over longer words. When she finished a paragraph, she looked up with frustration clear on her face. "I'm not good at it," she said. "You're doing fine. Some words just take practice. Mortimer says that too, but I've been practicing forever, and I'm still slow." Prudence thought for a moment. "When I was learning to read, my father told me something that helped. He said reading is like building a house. You start with small pieces and you add to them bit by bit. Eventually, you have something solid." Did that make it easier? Not at first, but it helped me be patient with myself. Liza considered this. "Will you help me?" "If you'd like." "Mortimer tries, but he gets tired at night. He never says so, but I can tell." "Then maybe we could work on reading during the afternoon, after lunch, before he comes in from the fields." Liza nodded slowly. "All right." That afternoon they sat together at the kitchen table. Prudence listened as Liza read, helping with difficult words but letting the girl work through most of them herself. After half an hour, Liza closed the book. "That was better than usual," she said. "You did well." Liza looked at Prudence directly for the first time since they'd met. "Are you going to stay?" Prudence met her gaze. "I don't know yet. We're still figuring that out." "Do you want to?" "I think so. But you must be comfortable too." "Mortimer says you're smart. He says you're good at the bookkeeping." "Did he?" "He told Mr. Hardy yesterday. I heard them talking." Prudence felt something warm settle in her chest. That was kind of him to say. He never says what he doesn't mean. Liza picked up her primer again. "Can we read more tomorrow?" "Of course." By the second week, small changes had appeared in the house. Prudence reorganized the pantry so supplies were easier to find. She mended a tear in the curtain in Liza's room. She created a simple filing system for farm documents that Mortimer could maintain himself. Nothing dramatic, just small improvements that made daily life run a bit smoother. One evening, Mortimer came in from checking the wheat fields to find Prudence teaching Liza to knead bread dough. Liza's hands were covered in flour, and she was laughing as the dough stuck to her fingers. "It's supposed to be smooth," Prudence was saying. "Like this. You have to be firm but not too rough. Mine looks lumpy. It'll smooth out. Keep working it." Mortimer stood in the doorway, watching them. When Prudence glanced up, what she saw in his expression made her pause. Not quite a smile, but very close to it. Something that looked almost like contentment. "Supper will be ready in an hour," she said. "That's fine." He turned to wash up at the basin. No rush. That night, after Liza was in bed, Prudence sat at the table updating the accounts. Mortimer was mending a broken tool handle by the fire. "You've made a difference here," he said without looking up from his work. Prudence set down her pen. "I've just been helping. It's more than that." He tested the handle, found it solid, and set it aside. "The house feels different, more settled. Is that good or bad?" "Good." He met her eyes. "Very good." Prudence felt her heart beat a little faster. "I'm glad." "Liza's taking to you. I wasn't sure she would. She's been protective of how things are, afraid of changes. She's a wonderful girl, cautious, but that's understandable. She asked me this morning if you were going to be her new mother." Prudence's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "That we hadn't decided yet, that it was up to both of us." He paused. "What would you have said?" Prudence thought about the question carefully. "I would have said the same, but I also would have told her that whatever we decide, I care about her already." Mortimer nodded slowly. "That's a good answer." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling softly, the house quiet around them. Outside, the Kansas night was dark and vast, but inside, everything felt warm and right. Prudence returned to her accounts, and Mortimer picked up another piece that needed mending. The work continued, steady and sure, building something solid, one small piece at a time. Chapter 14. The wheat was ready. Mortimer had been checking the fields daily, waiting for the right moment. When he came in one morning and announced they'd begin cutting tomorrow, Prudence saw something shift in his manner, a focused determination that hadn't been there before. "I'll need help," he said. "The Hardys will send over their oldest boy, but there's still plenty to do. Gathering, bundling, loading the wagon. Tell me what to do." The next morning, Prudence woke even earlier than usual. She dressed in her oldest work dress and tied her hair back tightly. By the time she reached the kitchen, Mortimer had already left for the fields. She packed food and water, then walked out to where he was working. The sun was just rising, painting the wheat fields gold. Mortimer looked up as she approached. "You didn't have to come out this early? You'll need to eat, and I can help with the gathering." He showed her how to collect the cut stalks, how to bundle them properly so they'd dry well. The work was harder than Prudence had expected. The stalks were rough on her hands, and bending repeatedly made her back ache. But she kept at it, matching Mortimer's steady pace. They worked side by side through the morning. Mortimer cut with strong, even strokes. Prudence gathered behind him, learning the rhythm of it. He'd glance over occasionally, checking her progress, but he didn't hover or offer unnecessary advice. By midday, Prudence's arms were tired and her hands were red, but she'd kept up. When they stopped for water and cold biscuits, Mortimer nodded his approval. "You're doing well," he said. "It's harder than it looks. Most worthwhile work is." The Hardy boy arrived after lunch. He was 15, tall and gangly, eager to help. With 3 of them working, the pace picked up. Prudence moved between gathering and helping load the wagon. The sun beat down and sweat dampened her collar, but she didn't stop. She found herself watching Mortimer work. The way he moved with purpose, never rushed but never idle. The calm focus in his expression. The capability in his hands as he bundled the wheat, tied it securely, and lifted it onto the wagon. There was a reassuring feeling about it, about him. By evening, they'd finished a substantial portion of the field. The Hardy boy headed home for supper, and Mortimer and Prudence walked back to the house together. "Liza will have kept supper warm," he said. "Mrs. Hardy showed her how to manage the stove while we're in the fields." Inside, Liza had indeed kept everything ready. Cold chicken, bread, and vegetables from the garden. She looked proud of herself as she served them. "You did well," Prudence told her. "Mrs. Hardy said I'm old enough to help more now that you're here to teach me." After Liza went to bed, Prudence sat on the porch steps, too tired to move. Her hands ached, and her shoulders felt stiff, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from useful work. Mortimer came out and sat beside her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel his presence. "Thank you for today," he said. "Having your help made a real difference. I'm glad I could be useful." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then Mortimer spoke again, his voice quiet. Sandra hated harvest time. The heat, the dust, the long hours. She'd help, but she dreaded it every year. Prudence looked at him. He was staring out at the darkening fields, his expression thoughtful. "She was a good woman," he continued, "kind, gentle. She loved Liza, loved this place, but she wasn't built for the hard parts of farm life. The physical strain wore on her. That must have been difficult." "It was. I tried to spare her when I could, but there's only so much one person can manage alone." He paused. "When she got sick, I kept thinking if she'd had an easier life, if I'd done more to protect her from the hardship, maybe she would have been stronger. Maybe she would have survived." Prudence chose her words carefully. "You can't know that." "No. But I think about it. Do you regret bringing her here?" "No. She chose this life, same as I did. We had 2 good years together. Not enough, but good." He turned to look at Prudence. "I just wish I'd known how to make it easier for her." Prudence understood what he wasn't saying. He was worried about bringing another woman into his life, worried about what the hardship might do. "I'm not Sandra," she said gently. "I know. I grew up working. I learned about hard work early on in my father's shop. Long hours are nothing new to me. My father's shop wasn't like this, but I understand having to do what needs doing, even when you're tired. Today was hard, but I can handle hard." Mortimer studied her face in the dimming light. "You didn't complain once. Not about your hands, not about the heat. You just kept working, because the work needed doing. Most women I know would have given up after the first hour. Then most women you know haven't had to earn their keep." Prudence looked down at her reddened hands. "These will toughen up. My back will get stronger. I'll learn to pace myself better. It's just a matter of time." "You sound certain." "I am. I didn't come here expecting an easy life, Mortimer. I came looking for an honest one." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When Sandra died, I thought that part of my life was over. The part where you share things with someone, build something together. I figured I'd just focus on the farm and raising Liza, and that would be enough. But it wasn't. It was lonely." He looked out at the fields again. Not just being alone, but having no one to share the good days with. No one to help shoulder the hard ones. Coming in at night to an empty house, even with Liza there. It felt incomplete somehow. Prudence waited, sensing he had more to say. "I was afraid to try again," he said. "Afraid of losing someone else. Afraid of bringing someone here who'd be unhappy. Afraid of making another mistake." He turned back to her. "But watching you today, working beside you, it felt right. Natural. Like this is how it's supposed to be." Prudence's heart beat faster. "It felt that way to me too." "Did it?" "Yes. I've spent the last few months feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere. In New York, I was the jilted daughter. Here, I wasn't sure where I belonged. But today, out in the fields, working beside you." She paused, searching for the right words. "It felt like I was exactly where I should be." Mortimer reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "Your hands are raw," he said, examining them gently. "They'll heal." "I should have given you gloves. I'll know for tomorrow." He smiled slightly. "You're planning to come back out?" "Of course. The harvest isn't finished." "No," he said, still holding her hand. "It's not." They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands linked, saying nothing more. Prudence felt something settle inside her chest, something that had been restless and uncertain since Charlton had left. Peace, not the absence of work or challenge, not the promise of an easy life. Just the simple, profound peace of being exactly where she belonged, with someone who valued her for who she actually was. She looked out at the wheat fields, at the solid farmhouse behind them, at the vast Kansas sky overhead. She thought about her life in New York, about the person she'd been there, about Charlton and her mother's expectations and the gossip that had followed her through town. All of that felt very far away now. Here, in this place, with this man and this child, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not rescue, not escape. Home. Mortimer squeezed her hand gently, and Prudence squeezed back. Tomorrow they'd return to the fields. There would be more work, more challenges, more long days ahead. But tonight, sitting on the porch steps with her hand in his, Prudence felt peaceful for the first time in months. Chapter 15. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Mortimer had gone into town for supplies and returned with mail from the post office. He handed Prudence 2 envelopes. "One from your father," he said, "and one I don't recognize." Prudence took them. Her father's handwriting was familiar and welcome. The other envelope was addressed in her mother's careful script. She set her father's letter aside to read later and opened her mother's first. Inside was a brief note and a folded newspaper clipping. "Prudence, I thought you should know about this. Mrs. Pedersen showed it to me yesterday. I did not intend to share it, but your father insisted you would want to be informed." Your mother, Prudence, unfolded the clipping. It was from a Boston Society page, dated 3 weeks earlier. The engagement between Mr. Charlton Radcliffe of New York and Miss Beatrice Whiteley of Boston has been terminated by mutual agreement. Miss Whiteley will remain in Boston with her family. Mr. Radcliffe's current whereabouts are unknown. Prudence read it twice, then set it down on the table. So Charlton's great opportunity had fallen through. The wealthy marriage that had been worth abandoning her for had failed. She felt a stirring in her chest, but it wasn't the pain she might have expected. It was more like recognition, the inevitable conclusion of a path built on calculation rather than substance. "Bad news?" Mortimer asked from across the room. "Not exactly, just news about someone from my past." He didn't press, and she appreciated that. Prudence opened her father's letter next. His words were warm and practical. He'd hired someone to help full-time at the print shop. Her mother was adjusting to Prudence's absence slowly. Business was steady. He hoped she was well and happy. She wrote back to him that evening after supper, telling him about the harvest, about Liza's progress with reading, about the satisfaction of seeing the farm accounts in order. She made no mention of Charlton's failed engagement. The second letter arrived a week later. Prudence knew Charlton's handwriting immediately. She stood in the kitchen holding the envelope, remembering all the times she'd received letters from him during their engagement. How she'd opened each one, hoping for warmth and finding only politeness. This time, she almost threw it in the stove unopened. But curiosity won out. "Dear Prudence, I hope this letter finds you well. I have been informed by your mother that you are currently residing in Kansas. I confess I was quite surprised to learn of your sudden departure from New York. I am writing because circumstances have changed considerably since our last conversation. The engagement I mentioned to you did not proceed as planned. It became clear that the arrangement was not suitable for either party. I have given much thought to my decisions over these past months. I realize now that I may have acted hastily in ending our engagement. At the time, the opportunity seemed advantageous, but I have come to understand that I placed too much emphasis on advancement and not enough on other considerations. I believe you, and I had a solid foundation. We understood each other. We were well suited in temperament and background. I wonder if you might consider giving our arrangement another opportunity. I recognize that you may have established yourself in your new location, but surely a life in New York with established prospects would be preferable to the uncertainties of frontier existence. I am confident we could build a respectable life together. If you are amenable to discussing this possibility, I would be happy to arrange for your return to New York at my expense. I await your response. Yours sincerely, Charlton Radcliffe." Prudence read the letter through once, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She walked out to the porch and sat on the steps. Liza was helping Mortimer mend a section of fence near the barn. She could hear Liza's voice, bright with questions, and Mortimer's patient responses. The sun was warm on her face. The wheat fields stretched out golden and peaceful. From inside the house came the smell of bread baking. Prudence looked down at Charlton's letter in her hands. He'd called their engagement an arrangement. He'd described their relationship as suitable and respectable. He'd suggested that established prospects were more valuable than what she'd chosen here, and he'd assumed she'd want to come back. She thought about the life Charlton was offering. the social position, the comfortable house in town, the respectable future her mother had wanted for her, the safety of familiar surroundings and established routines. Then she thought about the life she had now, the early mornings and long days, the satisfaction of work completed, Liza's growing trust, Mortimer's quiet steadiness, the peace she'd found in this place. Charlton's letter offered her certainty, security, a return to everything she'd known. But it didn't offer partnership. It didn't offer respect for who she actually was. It didn't offer the kind of honest connection she'd found here with Mortimer. Charlton wanted her back because his other option had failed. Not because he'd realized what he'd lost, not because he valued her for herself. He wanted an arrangement, a suitable match, a respectable solution to his current difficulties. Prudence stood and walked into the house. She placed Charlton's letter in the stove and watched it catch fire. She didn't need to respond. She didn't need to explain or justify her choice. Charlton had made his decision months ago when he ended their engagement without hesitation. She was simply confirming hers. That evening, Mortimer noticed the second letter was gone. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," Prudence said. "Just clearing away the past." He looked at her carefully, then nodded. "Good." Liza was already in bed. Prudence and Mortimer sat at the kitchen table with their evening coffee. The house was quiet around them. "There's something I should tell you," Prudence said. "The letter that came today was from Charlton, the man I was engaged to in New York." Mortimer's expression didn't change. What did he want? To reconcile. His engagement to someone else fell through. He suggested I return to New York. "I see." Mortimer's voice was carefully neutral. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I burned the letter." Mortimer was quiet for a moment. "You didn't want to consider it?" Prudence met his eyes. "No, not for a second." "Why not?" "Because whatever he offered was wrong. He talked about arrangements and prospects and suitability. He assumed I'd want to come back because life here must be difficult." She paused. "He never once mentioned partnership or respect or building something together. He never asked what I wanted. He just assumed his plan was better than mine." Mortimer reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm glad you stayed. So am I." They sat together in the lamplight, hands linked across the table. Outside, the Kansas night was dark and vast. Inside, everything felt settled and right. Prudence had made her choice, not out of fear or desperation or duty, but out of certainty about what she valued and who she wanted to be. Charlton's letter had offered her a return to her old life, but that life no longer fit. She'd grown past it, grown into someone who valued honest work and genuine partnership over social position and respectable appearances. She'd chosen this life, this place, this man, and she had no intention of looking back. Chapter 16. 2 days after burning Charlton's letter, Prudence found herself unable to concentrate on the accounts. The numbers blurred together. Her mind kept returning to the conversation with Mortimer, to the parts of the story she hadn't told him. She'd said Charlton wanted reconciliation. She'd said she burned his letter. But she hadn't explained the whole truth of what had happened in New York, why Charlton had ended their engagement, how it had felt, what it had done to her. Mortimer had a right to know. If they were truly building something together, it couldn't be built on half-truths. That evening, after Liza went to bed, Prudence found Mortimer on the porch. He was watching the sunset paint the wheat fields gold and red. "May I sit?" she asked. "Of course." She settled beside him on the steps. They sat quietly for a moment, watching the light fade. "There's more I need to tell you," Prudence said finally. "About Charlton. About what happened in New York." Mortimer turned to look at her. "You don't have to. I do. You deserve to know the whole truth." He nodded slowly. "All right." Prudence took a breath. "I told you Charlton ended our engagement, but I didn't tell you how or why." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We were engaged for 4 months. I convinced myself I was happy, that what we had was enough. He was respectable, ambitious. My mother approved. Everyone said it was a good match." "But it wasn't?" "No, Charlton never loved me. I knew that, but I told myself affection would grow after marriage. That partnership was more important than passion." She looked down at her hands. "Then he met someone else, the daughter of a wealthy family in Boston. She could offer him connections, money, access to political circles, everything he wanted. Mortimer was quiet, listening. He came to tell me 4 days after meeting her. He'd already made his decision. The conversation was brief, polite. He explained it was a better opportunity. He thanked me for understanding. Prudence's voice remained steady. He spoke about it the way you discuss changing business partners. Practical, reasonable, no apology, no regret. That must have been hard. What was hard was realizing I'd been foolish enough to accept so little, to convince myself that being useful and sensible was the same as being valued. She paused. The engagement ended on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, everyone in town knew. Mrs. Pedersen came to offer sympathy that felt more like curiosity. Mrs. Hardy asked if I'd done something to drive him away. My mother locked herself in her room for 3 days, crying about the lost opportunity. And you? I went to work at the print shop, kept my head down, tried to ignore the whispers and the pitying looks. Prudence looked out at the darkening fields. I told myself I was fine. That Charlton leaving was actually a relief. But the truth was, I felt humiliated. Not heartbroken, but ashamed. Ashamed that I'd been willing to marry someone who saw me as a convenience. Ashamed that I'd let my mother's ambitions matter more than my own judgment. Mortimer was silent for a moment. Then he said, "It wasn't your fault he left. I know that now. But at the time, I wondered if I'd been lacking somehow. If I'd been more charming, more decorative, more like the woman he wanted, maybe he would have stayed." "Would you have wanted him to?" Prudence considered the question. "No, but I wanted not to be the jilted daughter everyone pitied. I wanted not to feel like I'd failed at something everyone else seemed to manage. Marriage isn't something you succeed or fail at by being chosen. It's something you succeed or fail at by how you treat each other once you're together. I understand that now." Prudence turned to face him. When Charlton's letter came asking for reconciliation, part of me wondered if I should consider it. Not because I wanted him back, but because it would prove I wasn't a failure, that I was worthy of being chosen. "But you burned it." "I did, because accepting him would have meant going back to being the person I was before, the one who settled for being useful instead of valued, the one who let other people's opinions matter more than her own judgment." She paused. "Coming here, answering your advertisement, it wasn't about running away from Charlton. It was about refusing to let that experience define me." Mortimer reached over and took her hand. "You're not defined by what he did. You're defined by what you chose after. I want you to know that I'm not here because I was desperate or broken. I'm not trying to prove something or hide from humiliation." Prudence met his eyes. "I chose this. I chose you. Not because my other option failed, but because this felt right. I believe you. Do you? Because I need you to understand that Charlton's letter didn't tempt me. Not even for a moment. What we have here, what we're building, it matters more to me than any respectable arrangement back east ever could." Mortimer was quiet for a long moment, his hand still holding hers. Then he said, "When Sandra died, people told me I should marry again quickly. For Liza's sake, they said. For the farm. Mrs. Hardy suggested 3 different women within the first year. All practical, sensible choices. But you didn't. No, because marrying out of practicality, without real partnership, felt wrong. I'd rather be alone than settle for an arrangement that was merely functional." He looked at Prudence. "When I placed that advertisement, I wasn't looking for someone to fill a role. I was looking for someone who wanted to build something real, someone who chose this life deliberately, not desperately. And you think I did? I know you did. You didn't have to tell me about Charlton's letter. You could have kept it to yourself, let me think you'd never been tempted. But you told me the truth because honesty matters more to you than appearing unshakable." He squeezed her hand. "That tells me all that I need to know about who you are." Prudence felt something tight in her chest loosen. "You're not worried that I'll change my mind, that I'll decide farm life is too hard and go back?" "No." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen how you work, how you handle difficulties, how you treat Liza. You're not someone who quits when life gets hard. You're someone who figures out how to do it better." He paused. "And because you had a chance to go back, and you didn't even hesitate." "I didn't," Prudence said softly. "This is where I want to be. They sat together in the growing darkness, hands linked, the evening air cooling around them. In the distance, an owl called. The wheat fields rustled softly in the breeze. "Thank you," Mortimer said finally. "For what?" "For trusting me with the whole story, for not hiding the hard parts. Thank you for listening without judgment. There's no reason to judge. You were honest about what you wanted, even when it meant admitting you'd made mistakes before. That takes courage." Prudence leaned her head against his shoulder. It felt natural, right? "I'm glad I came here." "So am I." They stayed there until full darkness fell, sitting close, comfortable in the silence between them. The trust that had been building through shared work and honest conversation had deepened to become solid and sure. Prudence had told him everything: the humiliation, the doubt, the shame. And he'd listened without jealousy or judgment, accepting her past as simply part of who she was. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was better than that. It was real. Chapter 17. 3 days after their conversation on the porch, Mortimer came in from the fields earlier than usual. Prudence was at the kitchen table, helping Liza with her reading when he appeared in the doorway. "Liza, would you go check on the chickens for me?" he asked. "Make sure they all have water." Liza looked up from her book. "I checked them this morning." "Check them again, please." His tone made Liza close her book without further questions. She glanced between Mortimer and Prudence, then quietly left through the back door. Mortimer walked over to the table but didn't sit down. He stood there for a moment, his hat in his hands. "Is something wrong?" Prudence asked. "No, I just need to talk to you about something." Prudence set down the book and gave him her full attention. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. "When you first came here," Mortimer began, "I told you we should take time. Let you get settled, let Liza get comfortable, make sure this was what you wanted." "I remember. It's been almost 6 weeks now." "Yes." Mortimer turned his hat in his hands. "I've watched you work. I've watched you with Liza. I've seen how you handle difficulties and how you treat people. I know who you are now, not just from letters, but from living alongside you." Prudence waited, her heart beating faster. "You're strong, Prudence. Stronger than you give yourself credit for. You didn't come here running from something. You came here making a choice. That matters." He paused. "And you've proven over these weeks that you can handle this life, that you want to handle it." "I do want to." "I know, and that's why I'm asking you this now, not as something that was arranged before we met, but as a choice you can make freely." He set his hat down on the table and looked directly at her. "Prudence Everett, will you marry me?" Prudence felt something settle in her chest. Not excitement or nerves, but certainty. This wasn't like Charlton's proposal, delivered with calculation and expectation. This was honest and direct, acknowledging who she was and what she'd chosen. "Yes," she said without hesitation, "I will." Mortimer's shoulders relaxed. A smile touched his face, small but genuine. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I've been sure for weeks now, but I appreciated the time you gave me to prove it to myself." Prudence stood and walked over to him. "I want to marry you, Mortimer. Not because it's practical or respectable or what someone else thinks I should do, because I choose you, and I choose this life we're building together." He reached out and took her hand. "When?" "Whenever you think is right." "Next Sunday?" "The pastor comes through Oak Ridge once a month. He'll be at the church this week." "That's soon." "Too soon." Prudence thought about it. They'd already decided. They'd already committed to this partnership through weeks of work and honest conversation. A ceremony would simply make official what they'd already built. "No," she said, "it's not too soon." Mortimer squeezed her hand, then pulled her into an embrace. It was the first time he'd held her, and Prudence felt the solidity of it, the rightness. This was what partnership felt like. Not grand gestures or romantic declarations, but steady certainty. They stood there for a long moment before the back door opened, and Liza came in. "The chickens are fine," she announced. Then she stopped, seeing them standing close together. "What's happening?" Timer released Prudence, but kept holding her hand. "Come here, Liza." Liza walked over slowly, her expression curious and slightly wary. "Prudence and I are getting married," Mortimer said, "next Sunday at the church in town." Liza looked at Prudence, then at Mortimer. "Really?" "Really. So Prudence will stay here forever?" "If that's all right with you." Liza considered this seriously. Then she turned to Prudence. Will you still help me with my reading? Prudence smiled. Of course. And will you teach me to make bread like you do? Yes. And will you be my... Liza paused, searching for the right word. I'll be whatever you need me to be. Prudence said gently, I won't try to replace anyone, but I'll be here and I'll take care of you and I'll help you with whatever you need. Liza thought about this for a moment. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around Prudence's waist and hugged her tightly. Prudence looked at Mortimer over Liza's head, surprised. He smiled, and she saw relief in his expression. After a moment, Liza pulled back. Can I tell Mrs. Hardy? Yes, Mortimer said. But wait until tomorrow. Let's keep it to ourselves tonight. Liza nodded seriously, as though entrusted with a great secret. Then she grinned, suddenly excited. Are you going to have a party? Just a small gathering after the ceremony, Prudence said. Nothing fancy. Can I wear my Sunday dress? Absolutely. Liza bounced on her toes. This is good. I wanted you to stay, but I wasn't sure if you would. I'm staying, Prudence said firmly. Good. Liza picked up her reading book from the table. Can we finish this chapter before supper? Of course. They returned to their lesson, but Liza kept glancing at Prudence with a pleased expression, as though confirming she was really still there. That evening, after Liza had gone to bed, Prudence and Mortimer sat on the porch steps as they often did. She took it well, Prudence said. Better than I expected. I think she's been hoping for this, but was afraid to say so. She's a wonderful girl. She loves you, I can tell. Prudence leaned against Mortimer's shoulder. I love her too. It snuck up on me, but it's there. And what about me? Mortimer asked quietly. Prudence turned to look at him. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. I love you too, she said simply. I didn't expect to. When I answered your advertisement, I was looking for partnership and respect. I found those, but I found this as well. Mortimer kissed her forehead gently. I love you too, not just for what you do or how you work, for who you are. They sat together in the darkness, comfortable and certain. In a week they'd be married, but the commitment was already made. The ceremony would just be confirmation of what they'd built through honest work and genuine care. Prudence thought about the journey that had brought her here. The broken engagement, the gossip, the humiliation, the courage it had taken to answer an advertisement and travel across the country to marry a stranger. The weeks of work and uncertainty as they learned each other. All of it had led to this moment. Sitting on a porch in Kansas with a man who valued her for who she actually was, about to marry freely and without hesitation. She'd come looking for partnership. She'd found love as well, and she'd never been more certain of a choice in her life. Chapter 18, Sunday morning arrived clear and bright. Prudence woke early and dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she'd brought from New York. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and well made. She pinned her hair carefully and looked at herself in the small mirror. This was her wedding day. Again. But this time felt entirely different. Liza knocked on the door. Prudence, Mrs. Hardy is here. She brought flowers. Prudence opened the door to find Liza holding a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with ribbon. Mrs. Hardy picked them this morning, Liza said. She said every bride should have flowers. They're beautiful. Thank you. Liza was wearing her Sunday dress, her hair neatly braided. You look pretty, she said shyly. So do you. They walked out together to where Mortimer was waiting by the wagon. He dressed in his best clothes, and he looked at Prudence with an expression that made her breath catch. Ready? He asked. Yes. The ride to town was quiet but comfortable. Liza sat between them, occasionally reaching over to touch Prudence's hand as though making sure she was still there. The church in Oak Ridge was small and plain, with wooden benches and simple windows. When they arrived, a handful of people were already waiting, the Hardys with their children. 2 other farming families Mortimer knew from town, the shopkeeper and his wife, the pastor, an older man with kind eyes. Prudence felt a flutter of nervousness, but it wasn't the same anxious dread she'd felt before her almost wedding to Charlton. This was different. This was anticipation. Mrs. Hardy came over and took Liza's hand. You can sit with us, dear. Mortimer offered Prudence his arm, and they walked together to the front of the church. The pastor smiled at them both. We're here today, the pastor began, to witness the marriage of Mortimer Chase and Prudence Everett. Marriage is a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. It asks us to be honest with each other, to support each other, and to build something together that's stronger than what we could build alone. Prudence listened to the words. They felt true and solid, nothing like the flowery speeches she'd heard at other weddings. The pastor turned to Mortimer. Do you, Mortimer Chase, take Prudence Everett to be your wife? Do you promise to be her partner in all areas of life, to treat her with respect, to share both the work and the rewards of your life together? I do, Mortimer said steadily. And do you, Prudence Everett, take Mortimer Chase to be your husband? Do you promise to be his partner in all areas of life, to treat him with respect, to share both the work and the rewards of your life together? Prudence looked at Mortimer, at his calm, steady presence, at the man who had given her time to choose, who had valued her abilities, who had listened without judgment to her past. I do, she said clearly. The rings, please. Mortimer produced 2 simple gold bands. He slipped one onto Prudence's finger. With this ring, I promise partnership and respect. Prudence took the other ring and placed it on Mortimer's finger. Her hands were steady. With this ring, I promise partnership and respect. Then, by the authority given to me, I pronounce you husband and wife. What you've built together through honest work and genuine care is now recognized before this community. You may kiss your bride. Mortimer leaned forward and kissed Prudence gently. It was brief but sincere, and when they pulled apart, Prudence saw a look in his eyes that made her feel certain and proud. They turned to face the small gathering. Mrs. Hardy was wiping her eyes. Mr. Hardy nodded his approval. Liza was grinning widely. Prudence felt no anxiety, no doubt, only pride. She was Mortimer's wife now, by her own choice, on her own terms. This was right. After the ceremony, everyone gathered outside. Mrs. Hardy had brought food for a simple meal. Someone else had brought cider. They sat on the church steps and benches, eating and talking in the warm afternoon sun. I'm glad you stayed, Mrs. Hardy said to Prudence quietly. Mortimer's been alone too long, and Liza needed this. I'm glad I stayed too. Liza came running over. Can I tell people you're my mother now? Prudence glanced at Mortimer, who nodded slightly. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Prudence said. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Liza thought about this. I'll start with Prudence. Maybe later it will change. That's perfectly fine. By late afternoon, they headed home. Liza fell asleep in the wagon, tired from excitement. Mortimer drove with one hand, holding Prudence's hand with the other. When they reached the farm, Mortimer carried Liza inside and put her to bed still in her Sunday dress. Prudence began preparing supper, moving through the familiar kitchen with ease. This was her home now, officially, completely, without reservation. Mortimer came back into the kitchen and stood watching her work. You're my wife, he said, as though testing the words. Yes. How does it feel? Prudence paused, thinking about the question. Right, she said finally. It feels right. That evening, after the dishes were done, they sat together on the porch steps. The wheat fields stretched out before them, peaceful in the fading light. I never thought I'd marry again, Mortimer said quietly. After Sandra died, I convinced myself I was better off alone. What changed? Loneliness at first, then realizing that being alone wasn't the same as being safe from hurt, it was just being alone. He squeezed her hand. When I wrote that advertisement, I was looking for partnership. I found that, but I found more too. So did I. They sat in comfortable silence. Prudence thought about the journey that had brought her here. The broken engagement, the humiliation, the courage it had taken to answer an advertisement and travel west, the weeks of work and learning and building trust. All of it had led to this moment. Married to a man who valued her, sitting on a porch in Kansas, beginning a life they'd build together as partners. We should get some rest, Mortimer said eventually. Work starts early tomorrow. Prudence smiled. Even on their wedding day, he was practical, but that was who he was, and she loved him for it. They went inside. Mortimer showed Prudence to the room that had been his. This is ours now, he said simply. If that's all right with you. It's all right with me. They stood there for a moment, both slightly awkward with the newness of it all. Then Mortimer kissed her forehead. Good night, Mrs. Chase. Good night, Mr. Chase. Prudence changed and climbed into bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mortimer moving quietly in the next room, then settling down. The house was quiet around them. She was married, to Mortimer, starting a life based on honest partnership and mutual respect. No anxiety, no regret, just certainty and peace. Prudence closed her eyes and fell asleep, content. Chapter 19. The first month of marriage passed in a rhythm of shared work. Prudence woke each morning to help Mortimer with breakfast before he headed to the fields. She managed the household, kept the accounts current, and helped Liza with her studies in the afternoons. It wasn't romantic in the way her mother would have imagined, but it was solid and real, built on partnership rather than expectation. One morning, Prudence sat at the kitchen table reviewing the farm's financial records. The harvest had brought in good money, but winter supplies needed purchasing. She made careful notes about what they could afford and what needed to wait. Mortimer came in for coffee and glanced over her shoulder. "What are you working on?" "Planning for winter. I think we can order the extra feed for the horses, but the new plow will have to wait until spring." "That makes sense." He poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. "What about seed for next year?" Prudence flipped to another page in the ledger. "We have enough set aside. I transferred it to a separate account so we wouldn't accidentally spend it." Mortimer looked at the neat columns, the clear organization. "You've really made sense of this. I used to dread looking at these numbers. It's just a matter of having a system." Prudence made another note. "I was thinking we should start setting aside a small amount each month for repairs. The barn roof will need work eventually." "That's smart." Mortimer reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You're good at this, really good. Thank you." "I mean it. You've taken something I struggled with and made it manageable. That matters." Prudence felt warmth spread through her chest, not just at the praise, but at the respect behind it. Mortimer valued what she contributed. He saw it as a partnership, not just helpfulness. Later that week, Prudence was in town picking up supplies. Mrs. Hardy approached her outside the general store. "Prudence, how are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you." "Mortimer looks happier than I've seen him in years, and Liza is positively glowing." Prudence smiled. "They're both wonderful." "I heard you've been managing the farm accounts. Mr. Hardy says Mortimer told him you've got everything organized properly for the first time since Sandra passed." "I'm just doing what I did at my father's shop, keeping things in order." Mrs. Hardy patted her arm. "Don't sell yourself short, dear. What you're doing matters. A farm runs on more than just field work. Having someone who can manage the business side properly, that's valuable." Prudence carried those words home with her. Valuable. Not just helpful or useful, but valuable. That evening, she mentioned a concern that had been on her mind. "Mortimer, I've been thinking about Liza's education." They were sitting at the table after supper. Liza was in her room, supposedly reading, but probably playing with the doll Mrs. Hardy had given her. "What about it?" Mortimer asked. "She's doing well with reading, but she needs more than I can teach her. She should be in proper school." "The schoolhouse is 4 miles away. Too far to walk, especially in winter." "I know, but what if I taught her at home? Following a proper curriculum, I could write to my father and ask him to send textbooks." Mortimer considered this. "You'd take that on?" "I'd like to. Liza's bright. She deserves the chance to learn properly." "What would that cost? For the books?" Prudence showed him the figures she'd already calculated. "We can afford it if we're careful, and it's an investment in Liza's future." Mortimer studied the numbers, then looked at Prudence. "You've already planned this out." "I wanted to make sure it was feasible before suggesting it. What do you think we should do?" Prudence paused. "This is your decision as much as mine. She's your responsibility." "She's our responsibility," Mortimer corrected gently. "And you know more about education than I do. What do you think is best?" "I think proper schooling would help her. Even if it's at home, she could take exams later, prove what she's learned." "Then let's do it. Write to your father tonight." Prudence felt something settle in her chest. Mortimer hadn't just agreed with her suggestion. He'd asked for her opinion and trusted her judgment. He'd made it clear that Liza's welfare was a shared responsibility. This was what partnership looked like. Over the following weeks, Liza's studies became part of their daily routine. Every afternoon after lunch, Prudence and Liza sat together at the kitchen table. Liza was learning arithmetic, geography, history. Her reading improved steadily. One afternoon, Liza looked up from her book. "Prudence, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy here?" Prudence set down her pen. "Yes, very happy. Why do you ask?" "Because you came from a city, with shops and people. Here it's just us and the farm and sometimes the Hardys. I like it here. The city was crowded and busy. This feels peaceful." "You don't miss it?" "Not really. I miss my father sometimes, but I don't miss the life I had there." Liza thought about this. "Because of the man who left you?" Prudence had told Liza a simplified version of what had happened with Charlton. Not all the details, but enough that Liza understood. "Partly," Prudence said, "but mostly because I like the life I have here better. I like working alongside Mortimer. I like teaching you. I like knowing that what I do matters." "It does matter." Liza reached over and hugged Prudence suddenly. "I'm glad you stayed." Prudence hugged her back, surprised by the tightness in her throat. "So am I." That evening, Mortimer noticed Prudence was quieter than usual. "Something on your mind?" he asked. They were on the porch, watching the sunset over the wheat fields. "Liza asked me today if I was happy here." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I am." Prudence leaned against Mortimer's shoulder. "I was just thinking about how different this life is from what I expected. In a good way or bad way. Good, very good." She paused. "When I was engaged to Charlton, I thought marriage would be about fitting into someone else's plans, being useful in the ways they decided. Here, you ask my opinion, you trust my judgment, you treat what I do as important, because it is important. I know, that's what makes it different." Prudence took his hand. "You support what I want to do, even when it means change or extra work. Like Liza's schooling, you didn't question whether it was necessary, you just asked what I thought was best. Because you know about these things, it makes sense to listen to you." Not everyone would see it that way. Mortimer was quiet for a moment. "Prudence, you gave up your whole life to come here. You work as hard as I do, just in different ways. Why wouldn't I support what you want to do? Because some men wouldn't. Some men would see it as their wife overstepping. Then those men are fools." He squeezed her hand. "We're partners. That means we both get a say. Both contribute. Both support each other." Prudence felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she'd come looking for: true partnership, mutual respect, the freedom to be herself and have that valued. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too." They sat together as darkness fell, comfortable and certain. Inside, Liza was reading by lamplight, safe and settled in a stable home. The farm was thriving under their joint management. The future stretched ahead, full of work and challenges, but also purpose and belonging. Prudence thought about the woman she'd been in New York, uncertain, willing to accept too little, afraid of being pitied. She'd traveled west looking for partnership and found so much more: a life where her abilities mattered, a husband who valued her independence, a child who thrived under her care, a home she'd helped build through honest work and genuine partnership. This was the life she'd chosen, and every day she chose it again. Chapter 20. Spring came to Kansas with a rush of green. Prudence stood in the kitchen garden, checking the progress of the vegetables she'd planted. The soil was good here, and with proper care, they'd have fresh produce through summer and fall. Behind her, she heard the back door open. Mortimer appeared with the mail from town. "Letter from your father," he said, handing it to her, "and one from your mother." Prudence wiped her hands on her apron and took them. Her father's letters came regularly now, full of news about the print shop and small-town life. Her mother's came less often and were usually brief. She opened her father's letter first. His handwriting was familiar and warm. "My dear Prudence, business continues well. The new assistant is working out nicely, though he lacks your quick eye for details. Your mother is adjusting slowly to your absence. She speaks of you more kindly now than she did at first. I think she's beginning to understand that you made the right choice, though she may never say so directly. I have some news I thought you should know. Mrs. Pedersen mentioned that Charlton Radcliffe's position at the law firm has ended. Apparently, his conduct after the failed Boston engagement raised concerns. There was some matter involving another woman and misleading statements to a client. The details are unclear, but the result is certain. He's left New York entirely. No one seems to know where he's gone. I tell you this not because I think it will matter to you, but because you deserve to know how the story ended. The path he chose led exactly where one might expect. I hope you're well and happy. Your last letter about Liza's progress with her studies filled me with pride. You've built something good there, Prudence. Your loving father, Prudence, read the letter twice, then set it down on the kitchen table. She walked to the window and looked out at the wheat fields, deep in thought. Charlton's career had failed. The ambition that had driven him to abandon her had led to nothing. The connections he'd valued over genuine partnership had abandoned him in turn. She waited for satisfaction to arrive, for vindication or triumph, for the feeling that justice had been served. Instead, she felt only a quiet sense of closure, like finishing a book and setting it back on the shelf. Charlton had made his choices. She'd made hers. His had led to failure and isolation. Hers had led here, to this farm, this family, this life. There was no pleasure in his downfall, just a simple understanding that the story was complete. Mortimer came back inside and noticed her standing at the window. "Everything all right?" "Yes." Prudence turned to face him. "My father wrote about Charlton. His career has ended. He's left New York." "How do you feel about that?" Prudence considered the question. "I don't feel much of anything, honestly. Just closure, I suppose. The last thread connecting me to that old life is cut." Mortimer walked over and stood beside her at the window. "Does it change anything for you?" "No. If anything, it confirms that I made the right choice." Prudence took his hand. "Charlton chose ambition over partnership, status over substance, and it cost him everything. I chose differently. I chose this. No regrets? Not one." They stood together looking out at the farm they'd built. The wheat was growing well. The accounts were in order. Liza was thriving in her studies. Everything they'd worked for was taking shape. Prudence thought about the vow she'd been preparing to make when Charlton ended their engagement. A vow to honor and obey, to fit herself into his plans, to be useful in the ways he required. She'd never made that vow. Instead, she'd made a different one, a vow to herself, to choose her own path, to value partnership over status, to build something real rather than something impressive, to be honest about what she wanted and brave enough to pursue it. That vow she'd kept completely. Later that afternoon, Prudence sat on the porch steps with Liza. They'd finished lessons for the day, and Liza was reading ahead in her history book. "Prudence?" Liza looked up from her reading. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever wish you'd stayed in New York?" Prudence smiled. "No. Why do you ask?" "Because you had a different life there, a city life, and here it's just us and the farm and the work. I like this life better." "Really?" "Really." Prudence set down the mending she'd been working on. "In New York, I was trying to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. Here, I get to be myself. That matters more than any city could." Liza thought about this. "I'm glad you came here." "So am I." Liza went back to her reading, and Prudence picked up her mending. The afternoon sun was warm, and from the fields came the sound of Mortimer working. Everything was peaceful and right. That evening, after Liza had gone to bed, Prudence and Mortimer walked out to the edge of the wheat fields. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. "My mother sent a letter too," Prudence said. She'd read it earlier, but hadn't mentioned it yet. It was short. She said she hopes I'm well, that she's accepted my choice even if she doesn't fully understand it. "That's something," Mortimer said. "It is, more than I expected from her." Prudence looked across the fields. "A year ago, I was preparing to marry Charlton, trying to convince myself I was making the right decision. Now I'm here, and I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Do you think about what your life would have been like if you'd married him?" "Sometimes, but not with longing. More like wondering about a path I'm grateful I didn't take." Prudence squeezed his hand. "I made a choice that day I answered your advertisement. I chose to trust my own judgment instead of everyone else's expectations. I chose partnership over status, honesty over appearances." "And you're happy with that choice?" "Completely." Prudence turned to face him. "I look at this land, at the life we're building together, and I know I belong here. Not because I'm running from something, but because I chose this, deliberately, freely, with full knowledge of what it would mean." Mortimer pulled her close. I'm glad you chose this, chose us. So am I. They stood together as darkness fell, surrounded by the wheat fields they tended together. The house behind them held Liza, safe and settled. The accounts were balanced. The work was hard but purposeful. The partnership was real and mutual. Prudence thought about Charlton somewhere out there, chasing the next opportunity, still believing that status and advancement mattered more than genuine connection. She felt no anger toward him, no satisfaction in his failure, just a peaceful certainty that their paths had diverged as they should. She'd made a vow to herself to choose her own path, to build something real, to value partnership and honesty above all else. And standing here in the Kansas evening, with Mortimer beside her and Liza safe inside and the land they'd chosen stretched out before them, Prudence knew she'd kept that vow completely. She belonged here, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she'd deliberately chosen this place, this man, this life. And she would choose it again every day for the rest of her life.